Hello and welcome to Six Part. Today I'm going to start a new series, What If Bakugo Became the Boss Baby? If you enjoy this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
I want to give a shout out to one of my favorite writers, Imaginapirals, for this story. The plot of the story, Oh Baby, was that Ochako is transformed into a child and Katsuki is forced to care for her. Although I love the story, I thought it would be interesting to switch the roles. See the affectionate tendencies of Ochako and the cute toddler Katsuki. I'm hoping my rendition is as good as the original. Since Ua had deemed the trip a controlled recreational outing, everyone else would act as though this was normal while Aizawa would be miserable. Bakugo Katsuki detested the amusement park's loudness, brightness, and aggressive cheerfulness all in one tidy, expensive package. He stalked past a cotton candy stand and yelled, "Why the hell is there music everywhere?" his hands stuffed in his pockets. It's like being assaulted by happiness. Ochako Uraraka chuckled around a mouthful of churro while trailing him by a few steps with Mina and Suyu. "You say that like it's a bad thing, Bakugo," she replied. "It's fun. Look. Giant wheel." Bakugo sneered. "That's a Ferris wheel, idiot." Same difference. Bakugo, in spite of himself, looked sideways and froze. Ochako had a smile on his face. Not her shy, apprehensive training grin. Not her resolute smile that says, "I won't float into space today." This one was open, unguarded, and wide. She waved at something Mina was pointing out, her eyes bright and her hair catching the sunlight. Bakugo averted his gaze. TCH. Annoying. 20 minutes later, the villain attack took place. It did, of course. The sky rippled, like heat distortion on asphalt. While they were debating who should have the final funnel cake, Bakugo insisted it was him by right of combat strength. A man laughed as he fell from the sky, his body glimmering with erratic light. "Welcome, hero brats," exclaimed the antagonist. "Care for a little regression?" Aizawa made a quick move. "Everyone back. Bakugo. It's too late." Bakugo's palms had already begun to spark as he instinctively lunged forward. He was struck squarely in the chest by the beam. The world stumbled. Bakugo had the impression that he was slipping backward into a smaller, more constricted, and incorrect version of himself. His vision became fuzzy. His limbs were too short, then light, then heavy. He struck the ground hard, but it didn't hurt as much as it should have. Rather, there was a sudden, overwhelming sense of noise, colors too vivid, voices too loud, and fear rushing in without any kind of language or reason to ground it. There was a serious problem. Change to the viewpoint of Ochako. "Ochako. What is that?" She was staring, her ears buzzing, and she could hardly hear Mina's voice. There was a child on the ground where Bakugo Katsuki had been, where there should have been an angry, explosive, boisterous teenage boy. A tiny one, unmanageable blonde hair stuck up in all directions. Fists clenched in chubby hands. A UA uniform that was too large was gathered around his knees. He may have looked 3. No more than 4. His lower lip quivered and his red eyes blinked quickly. After that. No. The sound that burst from him was small, raw, and terrified. His breath caught quickly and shallowly as he scrambled backward, palms skidding on the sidewalk. No, 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 no. Without thinking, she dropped to her knees in front of him, her heart slamming into her ribs as she raised her hands. "Bakugo," she blurted out, instinctively lowering her voice. Hey, it's okay. It's okay. You're safe." The youngster gazed at her. His eyes gleamed dangerously, his face contorted, and then he started crying. Full-bodied, ugly sobs, with a red face, trembling shoulders, and helpless fists pounding the floor. "I wan it back," he cried. "Wan, go back." Her chest hurt. She looked up just long enough to see that Aizawa had the villain under control, that the recovery girl was already en route, and that Present Mike was shouting into a communicator. She did the only thing that felt right, scooping him up, because no one was stopping her. Bakugo instantly grabbed onto her hoodie with terrifying strength, pressing his face to her chest and crying uncontrollably. After a brief moment of freezing, she properly encircled him with her arms. She mumbled, "It's okay," and rocked softly without even noticing. "I've got you. I've got you." 10 minutes later, the future #1 hero, Bakugo Katsuki, dozed off with his head resting on her shoulder, his thumb in his mouth, and still sniffling. She looked down at him in complete disbelief. Whispering, "Oh my God," she said. "It's a tiny Bakugo." Bakugo woke up irate a short while later. Under normal conditions, this was not out of the ordinary. The reason for this was that his socks were incorrect. He glared down at his legs as if they had personally betrayed him, and kicked at them viciously. No, he muttered, his voice gravelly and small, his brows so tightly knit that they almost blended into his hair. Bad. Ochako tilted her head in perplexity as she sat cross-legged on the ground in front of him. What's bad? He poked his feet with a finger. These. She blinked. Your socks. Bakugo let out a frustrated sigh and attempted to get to his feet, only to trip over the hem of his pants and land softly on his butt. The room fell silent. Mina covered her mouth with her hand. Oh my god. Bakugo's face crumpled as he continued to stare at the floor. Ochako was already in motion when she picked him up and placed him against her hip before the tears could begin. In an instant, he wrapped his arms around her neck and buried his face in her shoulder as if it were the safest place on earth. She whispered, "Hey, hey," and gave him a back pat. "It's okay. You're okay." Bakugo took a whiff. "Floor mean. I know," she said gravely. "Very rude floor." He gave that a shaky huff of laughter. Momo Yaoyorozu, on the other side of the room, observed with wide, contemplative eyes. "I think I might be able to assist with the clothing situation," she said cautiously. Ochako raised a hopeful gaze. "You can." Momo nodded, already grabbing a blanket from a chair nearby and covering Bakugo's legs with it in a courteous manner. "If Bakugo-kun will allow me to take measurements." Bakugo's red eyes narrowed as he raised his head. "No." Momo froze. With a quiet sigh, Ochako adjusted her grip. "Hey, Bakugo, this is Momo. She's nice. She wants to help you get comfy clothes." Bakugo glanced at Momo and then at her. He then buried his face in her hoodie once more. "No." Suyu hummed. "He seems selective, snorted Mina. "He's glued to her." Ochako blushed instantly. I don't know why." Leaning against the wall, half awake, Aizawa opened one eye. "Imprinting," he silently said. "Or quirk trauma bonding. Or he's just a gremlin." Bakugo frowned as he glanced at the strange voice. "Shish." Aizawa shut his eye once more. "Yeah, okay, that tracks." By choosing to sit beside Ochako rather than in front of Bakugo, Momo was able to resolve the issue. When Bakugo's glare grew more intense, she let Ochako explain everything while speaking quietly. There was little opposition to the measurements, particularly after Ochako promised snacks. Momo came back 15 minutes later with a tidy stack of tiny clothes, pants with elastic waists that are the right size. An orange-trimmed little black tank top. Real socks that fit. It was a scaled-down version of Bakugo's signature style, resembling his hero costume. Mina let out a sound that could have been her soul departing from her body. "He's gonna look like an angry sunflower." Bakugo looked suspiciously at the clothing, so Ochako knelt down in front of him once more. "Wanna try these?" "Mine?" he inquired. She grinned. "Yep, yours." After giving this some thought, he gave a solemn nod. It was an experience to change him. Bakugo insisted on doing everything himself, which mainly meant yelling until she helped him after he got stuck halfway through his shirt. He stood motionless and looked down at himself when it was finally turned on. Then he smiled, a sharp little smile of pride. "Fits." Ochako's heart performed a perilous little turn. Bakugo quickly, and loudly, realized he would only listen to Ochako. "Bakugo, sit down," Iida firmly commanded. "No." "Bakugo, that is unsafe." "No." Bakugo's feet were planted, his arms crossed, and his chin protruded. Ochako's throat cleared. "Bakugo, can you sit with me?" Without delay, he turned, toddled over, and settled himself at her feet, leaning against her leg as if it had always been his place. Everyone looked. Weeping, Mina said, "Oh, this is bad." Aizawa let out a sigh. "Congratulations, Uraraka, you're his handler." Ochako let out a squeak. His what?" Bakugo leaned closer to her and yawned. Shortly after lunch, Bakugo's parents showed up. Without knocking, Mitsuki Bakugo stormed into the room with wild eyes. "Where is my kid?" She paused. "Dead." Her little son raised his head from Ochako's lap. "Mama." Mitsuki made a sound that was not human. "Katsuki." She took 3 steps across the room before falling to her knees and picking him up. Without delay, he put his arms around her neck, giggled, and planted sloppy kisses on her cheek. Mama, look. He clutched his hoodie with pride. Mitsuki choked. "Oh my god," and embraced him. "You're so small. You're so small." Behind her, Masaru lingered, her eyes bright, her voice soft. "Hey there, buddy." Bakugo bent to sneeze at his father. "Hi." The others merely observed. There were only gentle giggles and clinging affection instead of yelling and insults. Ochako grinned, until Mitsuki got to his feet. She squared her shoulders and said, "All right. We'll take him home and figure this out." Bakugo tensed up. "Number." Mitsuki blinked. "What?" His eyes darted around the room before settling on her as he twisted in her arms. "No go," he urgently uttered. "Stay, Chako." Her breath caught in her throat. Mitsuki followed his gaze before slowly turning back to face Ochako. "Chako." Panic rising, Bakugo reached for her with both hands. "Wan. Chako. Wan. Stay." She quickly started crying and got to her feet. Hey, it's okay." Bakugo made a lunge. He clung to her as if he was afraid she would disappear after she unconsciously caught him in midair. "I don't want leave," he told me in tears. "Wan, Chako." There was silence in the room. Aizawa massaged his face. "Well, that's a complication." Mitsuki gazed at the girl clutching her son, at the way Katsuki melted against her, exhaling evening air, fingers gripping fabric as if it were life itself. "Huh," she finally uttered. Her eyes narrowed after that. "Why doesn't he smell like nitroglycerin?" Everybody froze. Momo glanced down at Bakugo's hands. "He hasn't sparked once." Aizawa's eyes both opened. Bakugo sniffed. Ochako embraced him more tightly and said, "Boom gone." Bakugo realized the issue with his name in the middle of the afternoon. Ochako had placed him on the floor of the common area with a small stack of blocks that Momo had constructed. They were sturdy, colorful, and big enough to not be a choking hazard. With great focus, he stacked them, his tongue sticking out a little. "Good job, Bakugo," she said with a kind smile. The block slipped. He froze. He slowly turned to face her. Number. More stunned than anything, she blinked. "No." Wobbly but determined, he got to his feet and planted them. "Not that," he firmly stated. "Katsuki." He was so cute that her heart skipped a beat. "Oh," she murmured, "you want me to call you Katsuki?" He gave a single, abrupt nod. "Mine. That's your name," she acknowledged. "Okay, Katsuki." He instantly relaxed, forgetting the crisis and lowering his shoulders. As if the issue had been settled, he toddled back to his pile and started stacking again. Mina smiled as she observed from the couch. "Ah, that's cute." "Katsuki," Mina teased again, and he exploded right away. "No." Bakugo spun around, his face flushed, his fists clenched, his foot stomping so forcefully that it shook the floor. "No, you." Mina gave a yelp. "Whoa." His eyes watered as he thrashed. "Not yours. Not yours." In a matter of seconds, Ochako was kneeling in front of him. Hey. Deep breaths, okay." Bakugo clung desperately to her sleeve. "Chako, say it." She gave a soft smile. "Katsuki." With a sigh of relief, he pressed his forehead against her shoulder and puffed out little angry huffs against her collarbone. Unimpressed, Aizawa observed from the doorway. "So, exclusive naming rights." Iida nervously adjusted his glasses. "That is, extremely concerning." Mitsuki grinned while crossing his arms. "Nah, that's about right." A short while later, there was a tense, quiet, and ultimately inevitable discussion about where Katsuki would spend the night. Toddlers weren't prepared for UA. The Bakugo family's house was more secure and comfortable. Ochako understood, but she simply had no idea how to say goodbye. With her arms extended, Mitsuki knelt before her son. "All right, Katsuki, time to go." He gave her a look. Next, at Ochako, then back at her. "Okay," he said. Ochako took a swallow. He was immediately picked up by Mitsuki, who then immediately launched a barrage of kisses at him. "Mua. Mua. Mua. My baby. My tiny angry baby." With a squeal of laughter, Katsuki grasped her cheeks and pressed his forehead to hers. "Mama." Masaru ruffled his hair and joined in. "Good to see you, champ." With his arms wrapped around his mother's neck, Katsuki laughed, content and at ease. Despite the pain in her chest, Ochako grinned. Mitsuki withdrew slightly to give him a quick glance. "Say goodbye." Katsuki gave a serious nod. After turning and bending out of Mitsuki's, he froze and looked back at Ochako. With her hands clasped in front of her, she stood there, making every effort not to appear as though she was preparing for an impact. Katsuki's lip quivered. He reached down slowly and purposefully, his fingers curling around the material of her sleeve. He held on with a small but firm and unforgiving grip. No, he muttered. Ochako's breath caught, the room fell silent, and Mitsuki just stared. Katsuki's knuckles widened as he gripped harder. Stay. Ochako instantly grinned, her heart racing. Hey, Katsuki, it's okay. Your mom's right here. He gave a firm shake of his head. Won, Chako. With a sharp exhale, Mitsuki's eyes narrowed, but not in anger, evaluating. She then let out a sigh. Damn it, she whispered. Katsuki didn't hesitate when she kissed his hair and gently put him down. Curling into her as if he had always been there, he tottered right into her arms. Mitsuki observed how his breathing evened out, how his fingers remained fisted in fabric, and how he instantly relaxed. Yeah, she replied slowly. That tracks. Masaru gave a blink. Mitsuki. Her lips quirked as she crossed her arms. Looks like he's staying. Stunned, Ochako glanced up at her. Are you sure? Sharp and serious, Mitsuki met her gaze. Don't get cocky, kid. This is temporary. After pausing, she grinned. But if my son picked you? With a slight frown, Katsuki looked up. Mine. Mitsuki chuckled. Yeah, she replied. I can see that. Katsuki clung to him as if gravity had picked her, and Ochako simply gave him a tighter hug. Unfortunately, it was immediately clear that Ua was not designed with toddlers in mind. The gentle pat-pat-pat of bare feet filled the dorm hallway as toddler Katsuki Bakugo strode down it with unwavering determination, holding Ochako by the hand as if she were running late for a crucial appointment. This way, he says. Ochako faltered a little. Katsuki. Wait, where are we going? He said. Room, with firmness. Sleep. She blinked. Oh, wow, you know bedtime. He glanced at her. Not baby. Despite herself, she grinned. Right, sorry. Mina was leaning against the wall behind them, her hands clasped beneath her chin. I would die for him. Aizawa remained glued to his phone without even looking up. You'd last 3 minutes. A spare dorm room was thus transformed into a makeshift sleeping area, complete with a low bed, dim lighting, and non-breakable items. It was strange and safe at the same time. Katsuki stood in the doorway, slowly looking around the room. He tightened his hold on Ochako's hand. Number, he replied. She knelt next to him. What's wrong? His lips curled into a frown. Smells weird. She took a quiet breath. He was correct. It smelled like neutral detergent and clean sheets. Not at home. Not his. Oh, she murmured. Yeah, it's new. His shoulders crept upward as he crossed his arms. Dawn, like it. I know, she whispered. But I'll stay with you. Okay. He searched her face as if looking for lies as he looked up at her. Promise. Her chest grew constricted. Promise. Something seemed to be resolved by that. After giving one nod, he entered. It turned out that Katsuki did not go to bed. He had to fight for it. She said softly, pajamas, while displaying the cozy sleep shirt Momo had made. No, just to sleep. No. With his back turned and his arms crossed, he twisted away and climbed onto the bed with remarkable speed. Sitting next to him, she sighed with fondness rather than frustration. Katsuki, you can't sleep in your clothes. Before she could stop herself, she snorted, watch me. If he still had his quirk, he would have given her a glare so fierce it could have burned holes in the mattress. He didn't, and the realization came to him abruptly. He held up his hands, palms up, but nothing came of it. No heat, no spark, no familiar pressure accumulating beneath his skin. His hands shuddered. She froze as he whispered, boom. She saw his face contort into something worse than tears. This was loss, confusion, and rage. I broke, he muttered. Her heart broke. She took a step forward and encircled him from behind with her arms. You're not broken, she firmly stated. Your quirk's just asleep right now. His fists clenched as he shook his head. Need it. I know, she said in a whisper. But you're still you. His little body was tense as he leaned back against her. Still Katsuki. That was always Katsuki. His entire body trembled as the tears came quickly and fiercely, angry, frustrated sobs. His fists pounded weakly against her chest as he sobbed into her shoulder, as if he were trying to make the world pay attention. Throughout it all, she rocked him gently and reassured him in whispers until his sobs turned into hiccuping breaths. He eventually slumped, exhausted. Sleep now, she whispered. Okay, he muttered. Regretfully, it took a lot of negotiating, assurance, and absolutely no tricks to get him to put on pajamas. He insisted on lending a hand. He demanded to know what was going on. He urged her to keep her eyes on him. After getting dressed, he crawled into bed, only to emerge again right away. "Stay." Ochako gave a quiet smile. She said, "I will. I'll sit right here." 5 minutes at first, followed by 10 and 15. His eyes drooped, but they opened the instant she moved even a little. "Where goin'?" Quickly. "I'm just adjusting," she said. He moved in closer. "No leave. I'm not leaving. Promise." She took a swallow. "Promise." Just in case, he reached out and caught the hem of her shirt. Upon Ochako's eventual attempt to stand, with extreme caution and gentleness, Katsuki awoke like a guard dog. "No." She stopped. She said, "I'm right here, I'm just going to." "No, go." His eyes filled with tears at once, and she sat down again, her heart racing. Okay, I won't go." Curling up like he had done 1,000 times before, he scurried across the bed and climbed straight into her lap. After that, there was no dispute, she stayed. With his fingers still clenched in her shirt, his breathing gradually evened out. Even when she slept, one leg was slung over her thigh in a possessive manner. Overwhelmed, she gazed down at him and grinned at his serene appearance. He was simply so little. She whispered, "I've got you," and Katsuki fell asleep soundly. She tucked the blanket around him after carefully moving him into the bed. She took a moment to brush his bangs out of his face before getting up and going to her room. The scream, which was terrified rather than angry or loud, ripped through the dorm hallway like an explosion. Before she even woke up, she was out of bed. Her heart thumping so loudly that it overpowered all other thoughts, she bounded down the hall barefoot as her door slammed open. She followed the sound with wild eyes and a sinking certainty in her chest without pausing to think or consult anyone. "I'm coming, Katsuki." He was sitting upright in bed with his fists entangled in the blankets and his chest heaving when she stormed into the spare room. "No. No. No." His eyes were wide and unfocused, as if he was still somewhere else, and his face was drenched in tears. Hey. She rushed to his side and picked him up as if he were weightless. "Katsuki, I've got you. With an almost painful sob, he pressed his face against her shoulder and wrapped his arms tightly around her neck. "Gone," he suffocated. "Boom, gone. Can't. I know," she said in a fierce whisper as she rocked him back and forth. "I know, but you're safe. You're here. I'm here." Little gasps scraped out of him as if he was having trouble breathing, and his breathing hitched violently. With one hand making slow circles in his back, she lowered herself onto the bed beside him and held his head against her chest. "Listen to me," she muttered, her hands trembling but her voice steady. "Nothing bad is happening. You're not alone. You didn't lose me." He let out a whine. "Didn't leave." "No," she replied right away. "I promise. I came right away." That seemed to shatter something, and he melted completely against her, his fingers aching as his grip tightened and his sobs turned into hiccups. She didn't even think about trying to put him back down. She held him for a long time as his body went limp from exhaustion and his breathing evened out. He dozed off in her arms and slept deeply and soundly. With her eyes burning, she bent over and put her cheek against his hair. "You scared me," she said softly. Katsuki curled closer, letting out a quiet sigh while he slept. Morning arrived too quickly. Blinking against the light coming in through the window, Katsuki awoke slowly and bewildered. He was unsure of his location for a single, horrifying second. Then he sensed it, the familiar heartbeat, the warm arms. With a drowsy moan, he instantly relaxed and buried his face in Ochako's shoulder. "Chako." Her eyes were half-lidded as she smiled. "Morning." "Me too," she replied. "Let's go get breakfast, okay?" With his head leaning against her collarbone as if it were the most natural thing in the world, he nodded and allowed her to carry him down to the kitchen. It was a chaotic breakfast. It was a quiet, bewildered chaos rather than a boisterous one. Momo had made a complete spread, including milk, eggs, toast, fruit, and oatmeal. Katsuki simply gazed at it before crossing his arms. "Good pout." "No." Ochako blinked. No, eat." Mina knelt next to him and extended a spoon. "Come on, little dude." "No." He clenched his jaw and turned his face away. Iida scowled. "Bakugo, you must eat to maintain." "No." Ochako squatted next to him. "Hey," she murmured, "what's wrong?" From under his lashes, He glanced at her. Don't wanna. Her heart tightened. Oh, she muttered. She reached for the spoon and extended it. Katsuki, will you eat for me? She pushed as he continued to pout. Please. He gave her a timid smile and nodded right away. Okay. Obediently, he opened his mouth and took the spoonful, chewing intently. There was silence in the room. Aizawa drank his coffee with a sigh. We've created a dependency. Ochako flinched. I didn't mean to. After swallowing, Katsuki pulled at her sleeve. More. She gave a helpless smile. Yeah, more. After that, he drank every sip and every bite, but only after Ochako asked him to. Each time she did, her heart grew a bit larger as he gazed at her as if she were the center of the universe. Ochako had to experience separation anxiety firsthand. With her shoes in hand and her backpack already slung over her shoulder, she stealthily left the common area. Katsuki and Momo were sitting on the couch, intently stacking blocks. He had his back to her. He was unaware of it. Well, she thought, it will only take 5 minutes to get my notes. Iida said, Katsuki, with courtesy, would you like assistance? The scream came right away. No. Katsuki spun around, her hands clenched, her face flushed, and the block flew across the room. Don't say it. Iida stopped in her tracks. Say, what? My name, Katsuki exclaimed, tears already streaming down her cheeks. Not yours. Ochako whirled around. Katsuki. He started running as soon as her voice reached him. With his arms extended, he sprinted across the room and slammed into her legs with enough force to almost topple her. Sobbing as if she had disappeared forever, he clung to her, his face buried in her thigh. You gone, he exclaimed. You gone. With a sudden, I'm here, she knelt down and gathered him in her arms. He clung desperately to her hair, hoodie, and anything else he could get his hands on, saying, I'm right here. I didn't leave. Mina gazed. She was gone for literally 3 steps. Aizawa squeezed his nose bridge. This is escalating. With a little hiccup, Katsuki raised his head and looked at Iida over Ochako's shoulder. Don't say it, he cautioned. Iida gave a rigid nod. Understood. Her heart was pounding as she gave Katsuki a closer hug. She whispered, I was just getting my notes. No, he firmly said. Stay. She took a swallow. Okay. The name rule was very clear by mid-morning. He melted, giggled, or smiled whenever she or his mother said Katsuki. No, if anyone else said it, it wasn't even Mina's intention. Katsuki, look. He had a full-body tantrum and fell to the ground as if he had been hit. Not yours. He kicked and yelled. Mine, Mama, Chako. Ochako was kneeling next to him already. Hey, hey. With his fists clutching her shirt as if she were the only remaining solid object in the world, he scurried into her lap. In a deadpan statement, Aizawa said, so we're just not using his name anymore. Tsuyu gave a nod. Ribbit. Acceptable. Mitsuki arrived for her visit shortly before lunch, and Katsuki noticed her before she had even taken 2 steps inside the dorm. Mama. He ripped from Ochako's embrace and lunged forward, almost tripping over his own feet, before Mitsuki picked him up with ease. There's my boy, she exclaimed, kissing his cheeks loudly right away. Mwah. 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 Katsuki laughed and squealed while grabbing her face with her hands. Mama, missed you. I missed you too, she said, giving him a strong hug. You bein' good. He gave a solemn nod. Ochako snorted, yes. Mitsuki gave her a sly glance. Katsuki held Mitsuki's collar as if he might float away as they sat together on the couch, Mitsuki holding Katsuki. He was content and at ease, talking softly about blocks and, boom gone, and, Chako this, Chako that. After listening carefully, Mitsuki's eyes grew piercing. So, she remarked nonchalantly. What happens when you leave the room? Ochako tensed. He doesn't like it. Katsuki tightened his hold. No leave. Mitsuki hummed. And eating. Only if I ask, acknowledged Ochako. And sleep. He won't stay asleep unless I'm there. With a sigh, Mitsuki thoughtfully massaged her son's back. Yeah, that's what I figured. Masaru scowled. Is that bad? Katsuki, who was now dozing off against her shoulder, caught Mitsuki's attention. It's not great, she admitted candidly. But it's not her fault. She turned to face Ochako again. You didn't force this. Ochako gave a swift shake of her head. I swear, I just. You responded, interrupted Mitsuki. She hesitated before saying, that's what he needed. I'm just worried. Another test was lunch. With his arms folded and his frown fixed firmly, Katsuki sat in his chair. Momo carefully placed a plate down. Here you go. No. With a quiet sigh, Ochako knelt next to him. Katsuki, can you eat for me? After glancing at her, he gave her a gentle nod. Okay. Mitsuki kept a close eye on things. Katsuki puffed up his chest and scowled at his spoon after a few bites. Big, he said, strong. Ochako grinned. You are. After hesitating, he said, can, and extended the spoon. Can do. Her heart almost exploded. Yeah, she replied, you can. Before his arm gave way and he pushed the spoon back at her while complaining, he was able to take 3 bites. Mitsuki grinned. Still a baby. Katsuki frowned, but it was more of a cute pout. Not baby. She gave him a head kiss. Sure. Ochako thought she might be able to attend a few afternoon classes since his mother was here, but she was mistaken. He had an immediate breakdown as soon as she left the room. No, Chako, don't go. I'll be back, she said as she knelt before him. I won't be gone long. He gave her a fierce headshake after staring at her. No class. Gently, I have to, she said. In an instant, his face wrinkled. No, no, no. Sobbing, he leapt forward and wrapped around her waist like a koala. Don't go, she exclaimed, her eyes blazing. Slowly, Mitsuki stood up. She stepped in and said, hey, firmly. Katsuki, look at me. He looked but whimpered. Mitsuki remarked, she's not leaving forever, she's coming back. Mitsuki sighed as he shook his head and tightened his grip. Okay, she understated. Guess you're skipping class. Ochako made a snap decision. Yeah, immediately relieved, poor little Katsuki collapsed against her, his fingers still clenched in fabric, his breath catching as he relaxed. Mitsuki saw his eyes soften as he relaxed. Damn, she muttered. With her heart racing, Ochako gave him a hug. It would be difficult for him to break free from his attachment to her, which went beyond simply caring for him. She was genuinely alarmed by Katsuki's abrupt reaction the first time he acted like his older self. It was over a simple pencil and something dumb. Mina reached over and picked up the pencil he had dropped while he was sitting on the floor next to her, drawing intently. Hey, little guy, don't touch my stuff. There was no toddler slurring or stumbling over the words, instead, they sounded sharp, clipped, and angry. This was 100% Bakugo, precise and clean. There was silence in the room. It appeared as though Katsuki realized it simultaneously with everyone else. His eyes grew wide. He clenched his hands. Something older briefly appeared behind his eyes, a mixture of anger and confusion, as if he had stepped into an unsuitable shape. Ochako instantly knelt. Hey, she murmured. It's okay. She didn't mean anything. The sharpness gradually subsided as he gave her a serious look. He drooped his shoulders, panting. Mine, he uttered, his voice diminished once more. She whispered, I know, and returned the pencil. You can tell us without yelling. He nodded, a look of shame that no 3-year-old should have been able to display. Ochako had trouble falling asleep that night. Before she saw him, she heard him. A tiny hand fisting in sheets, a tiny tug, and the faint pitter-patter of bare feet. She grinned and opened one eye. Standing next to her bed, Katsuki dragged the blanket like a tail behind him. He had untidy hair. Sleep was heavy in his eyes. She felt her heart squeeze painfully as he simply stared at her without saying anything. She raised the blanket. Come here. He made no hesitation. With the blanket clenched in one fist, he crawled in and curled up against her side, shoving his icy feet under her legs. He sighed as if he had finally found the right spot and pressed his face against her shoulder. Without thinking, she put an arm around him. She muttered, bad dream. He gave a nod. Boom back, loud. She combed his hair. It's gone right now. You're safe. He moved in closer. Stay, he muttered. I'm not going anywhere. That turned into a nightly ritual where he simply showed up without asking again. A few days later, Katsuki began to drop emotional landmines. He tilted his head abruptly as they were brushing their teeth together, her half asleep, him standing on a stool. Chako, yes, you pretty. She stopped brushing. What? He shrugged as if it were clear. Pretty Chako. Thank you, she managed, her face burning. Satisfied, he nodded and resumed his vigorous teeth cleaning as if the compliment hadn't just moved her internal organs around. He stayed a little too long the next time. She tried to get up from where they were sitting on the couch, him half asleep. He simply put his arms around her waist and held on without crying. Silently, 5 more, he said. Her throat constricted. She sank back down and whispered, okay, but 5 more minutes stretched into 30. It was Aizawa who suggested allowing him to attend class. He had stated, supervised, contained. You're his anchor anyway. They therefore set him up. Next to Ochako's desk was a small one. Crayons. Paper. Like emergency supplies, snacks are stored away. Katsuki's scowl was fixed, and he sat very straight with his feet hanging down. This is dumb, he whispered. Ochako concealed a grin. You don't have to like it. He sighed. Okay. He was generally good. He was a frenzied colorer. He arranged his crayons according to his tastes. Scowled at anyone who approached too closely. However, every few minutes. Chako. She instinctively leaned over. What is it? He raised his document. Look. She took a close look at it. Wow, that's really good. He smiled and immediately returned to coloring. It kept happening over and over. He waited for her response each time, as if it were more important than the drawing itself. The class had stopped acting as though they didn't notice by the 4th interruption. In a whisper, Midoriya said, that's kind of amazing. Ochako leaned over to show Katsuki another scribbled explosion, grinning down at her. Yeah, she muttered. It was incredible, and in between the quiet, devastating trust, the unexpected outbursts of teenage rage, and the nightly cuddles, she came to a terrifying realization. She didn't know how to stop choosing him back because Katsuki wasn't just attached to her. It seems that Katsuki decided he didn't like how people viewed Ochako. He was coloring quietly at his small desk one moment, and then a second-year student from a different class leaned too close. He wasn't sure when he had made the decision. You're really good with kids, the girl told Ochako, grinning. He's cute. Katsuki's eyes narrowed as he slowly raised his gaze to her. With his arms spread wide like a shield, he slid out of his chair and positioned himself squarely in front of Ochako's legs. Mine, he uttered. The girl gave a blink. Oh, I didn't mean. Mine, Katsuki said again, more loudly. His jaw was set with unmistakable Bakugo defiance, and his chin was raised. Ochako blushed. Katsuki. His fingers curled in a possessive manner as he grasped her pant leg. Chako mine. There was a sudden silence in the room. From the front of the class, Aizawa let out a sigh. And that's enough social interaction for today. With her hands up, the girl quickly retreated. Sorry. Until she was gone, Katsuki remained motionless. It was only at that point that he relaxed and leaned back against Ochako's knees like a guard dog who had completed his task. Her heart was racing as she knelt next to him. Hey, you don't have to protect me, you know. He gave her a serious look. Yes I do. His voice was certain, not wavering like a child. She took a swallow. Okay. He arrived at her room earlier than normal that evening. No nightmare. Not a tear. Only the faint clatter of knuckles on her door frame and the soft shuffling of feet. He was standing there with a blanket wrapped in his arms when she opened her eyes. She whispered, come here, and began to lift the covers. Without saying anything, he climbed in and curled up against her chest rather than her side. He nestled his head beneath her chin. He breathed slowly and warmly. With caution and reverence, she encircled him with both arms. There was silence for a while. Katsuki then moved closer, half asleep, and muttered, love you, Chako. Ochako's heart almost stopped. To avoid waking him, she had to bite down on her breath because it caught so sharply. In an instant, her eyes burned. Her voice was hardly more than a whisper as she pressed her cheek against his hair. She said, I love you too, before she could stop herself. In his sleep, he grinned. The following afternoon was the meltdown. It began modestly. There was a lot of noise in the training room. A loud voice. Someone is fighting. Katsuki immediately tensed. He balled his hands into fists. No, he whispered. Stop. Ochako saw right away. Beside him, she knelt. Hey, what's going on? With his teeth clenched, he uttered, they're loud, don't like it. She grabbed his hands. Let's go somewhere quieter, okay. However, it was too late. Something broke. His rage rose quickly and forcefully. It was too large, too piercing, and too familiar. The sound of Katsuki's scream reverberated off the walls, raw and angry. I said stop, he yelled. The air cracked with a spark. Ochako and Katsuki both froze. Tiny explosions sputtered weakly, erratic and uncontrollable, while they gazed at his palms. There was stunned silence for a heartbeat. Then Katsuki let out another scream, this time in sheer terror. No, no, no. He scrambled away from his own hands as if they had betrayed him, staggered backward, tripped, and fell hard. He cried, I don't want it. Make it stop. Despite the heat stinging her skin, she was there in an instant, falling to the ground with him and embracing him. It's okay, she uttered quickly. It's okay, Katsuki, I've got you. His face buried against her chest, trembling violently, he clung to her as if he were drowning. I'm gonna hurt you, he screamed. I don't want it. Don't wanna hurt you. Her heart broke. With one hand holding the back of his head and the other covering his hands to keep them securely pressed against her hoodie, she tightened her grip on him. You're not hurting me, she firmly stated. You're in control, you stopped. As the sparks died, Katsuki clung more tightly and wept in helplessness. Scared. I know, she said in a whisper. It came back too fast. That's scary. He was shaken, tired, and afraid. Don't like it. Wanna be safe. Gently rocking him, she repeatedly whispered, you are safe. You didn't hurt anyone. I'm right here. His breathing evened out slowly. His hold relaxed just enough to allow him to glance up at her, his eyes moist and red. Her chest hurt. You mad? She asked. No, she murmured. Never. He fell back against her, exhausted. With her heart racing with one horrifying truth, Ochako held him there on the floor of the training hall amid stunned classmates and silence. Katsuki Bakugo no longer merely feared his strength. He was afraid of himself. And at this moment, the only thing between him and that fear was her. Overnight, the fear persisted. It was evident in the way Katsuki kept his hands away from his body, his fingers tense and wary. When he became irritated, he flinched. In the way he looked at himself, always. She was aware of everything, but she didn't know how to comfort him. The afternoon light was streaming in through the windows as they sat together on the floor of the dorm. With her legs crossed, Katsuki gazed down at his palms with such intensity that it hurt her chest. He spoke slowly and deliberately to them. You, he whispered. He twitched his hands. He said, no hurt, with firmness. You don't hurt Chako. Her chest tightened with breath. He clenched his small fists, then forced them open once more, as if he were engaged in combat with an unseen foe. Protect, he continued. He nodded to himself, as if the issue had been resolved. No boom. She had to turn away from the painful swelling of her heart. Katsuki, she asked softly once she was well. He looked up. You're doing really good, she told him up front. He swelled slightly. I know, he said that. Even in this manner. The sparks became less frequent as the days went by. They were small and under control when they did, usually brought on by fear rather than rage. Every time, Katsuki's eyes widened and he instantly froze before thrusting his hands behind his back. No, he would respond angrily. Stop. He would always sit through it with Ochako, breathing alongside him, calming him down, having faith in him. Too easily, too deeply, he trusted her back. She loved him. She felt the weight of it all settle into her chest one night as he curled up against her side, fingers making absent-minded circles on her sleeve. This was the version of him that she adored. The transparency, the truthfulness, the way his feelings poured out without armor or shame. When he needed her, when he was happy, or when he was afraid, he told her exactly how he felt. It wasn't the Katsuki Bakugo she had fallen in love with, it was pure, wonderfully devastating. She became aware that she had missed the piercing smile. The fire. The boy who put her to the test, stood by her side in combat, and had complete faith in her strength. Before all of this, a young man had captured her heart, and she missed him. Ochako blinked back tears as she pressed her lips together. She muttered, you're gonna grow up again, into the darkness. Half asleep, Katsuki shifted. Yeah, you won't remember this the same way, she whispered. You'll be different. His fingers tightened slightly in her shirt as he scowled in his sleep. He muttered, still me, you said. She closed her throat. I know, she said in a whisper. I know. With her chin resting on his head, she held him close, loving him in a way that was too vast and complex to be named just yet. Because Katsuki Bakugo would one day be able to stand tall once more, bright, loud, and flaming. Even if it meant letting go of this version of him, she would still love him then. Ochako quietly began to get ready. They mocked her from a chair by her door after she had Kirishima gather some of his clothes from his room. She was only able to do little, inconspicuous things after that, and was unable to have conversations about it because she had not made any lists or plans. The kind you did when you were aware that something valuable was fleeting. When she brushed Katsuki's hair, she stayed longer. The weight of him as he dozed off against her chest was committed to memory. She allowed herself to savor the sound of his laughter and the way he pronounced her name as if it were the safest word he knew. When she was by herself, she sobbed to herself, her heart divided between the two incarnations of him. Sitting on the edge of her bed, knees pulled up, face buried in her hands to keep others from hearing, it happened late at night. Like grief coming early, courteous but unrelenting, her chest ached in a way she hadn't realized it could. She was unaware of the slight shadow in her doorway or the sound of footsteps. She gave a quiet gasp as warm arms encircled her midsection. With clumsy determination, Katsuki climbed fully into her lap and pressed against her. His blanket dragged behind him as he curled tightly, his forehead tucked under her chin. "Don't like Choco sad," he muttered. Her heart broke. She whispered, her arms automatically wrapping around Katsuki. "Oh, Katsuki, I'm sorry." He tightened his grip, his tiny hands clenched in her shirt as if he could keep her together with enough effort. In the only way he knew how, he soothed her by rubbing his cheek against her collarbone. "No cry," he said gravely. "I hear." Regardless, tears spilled out. "I know," she said in a whisper. "I know you are." He remained there until her breathing stabilized and the pain subsided enough for her to act as though nothing was wrong. Days later, the question that almost broke her arrived out of the blue. As they sat on the floor together, Ochako leaned against the couch and watched Katsuki with that tender, aching affection she had given up trying to conceal, while Katsuki was absently lining up crayons. Abruptly, his expression changed from that of a child to that of someone who was thinking. His brows were furrowed, not in bewilderment but in concentration as he studied her face for a long time. "Love you, Choco," he uttered. In her throat, her heart leapt. "I love you too," she said mindlessly. The words came too easily and too honestly. Satisfied, Katsuki gave one nod. And then, right away, "Big Me does too." Her chest tightened painfully, the room became very still, her smile faltered, and her lungs filled with lead. "God," she finally forced herself to speak. "You don't know that," she said softly. His eyes grew wide. Fear flickered for 0.5 seconds. Then, as if he were debating the universe itself, his jaw clenched and he nodded angrily. But he insisted, "Still me. Same me." Her eyes burned. "I'm not sure." Then she responded to him. "Yeah," she said softly. "You are." All he needed was that. Scrambling to his feet, he turned around and climbed directly into her arms as if the answer had been decided. His arms were tightly wrapped around her, as if he was worried that she might escape, and his cheek was pressed against her chest. He was right, or at least she hoped he was, so she held him while her heart twitched painfully in her ribs. Regardless of his height, regardless of how jagged the edges were once more, this was still Katsuki Bakugo, this fierce devotion, this fire, this heart. Even if it hurt, loving him meant loving everything. Later, Katsuki was coloring with intense concentration while sitting on the ground. His brows were furrowed and his tongue protruded slightly. He used the crayon so forcefully that it broke in two. "TCH, he whispered. Ochako grinned as she sat close by with her notes. "Everything okay?" he complained without raising his gaze. "Big Me is stupid." Before she could stop herself, she snorted. Teasfully, "That's not very nice," she said. The paper made him frown. "He yells too much. Makes you cry." Her chest constricted violently, but before she could answer, he said, more quietly and thoughtfully, "I don't." Her heart melted all over. Leaning over, she ran her fingers through his soft, disheveled hair and gave him a gentle head rub. "No," she replied kindly. "You don't." He instantly leaned into the touch, making quiet muttering sounds of approval before straightening up with new resolve. There was silence for a few minutes. Then, "Choco." She gave him a look. "Yeah." With something behind his back, he got up and shuffled over. Now he had a serious face, too serious for a 3-year-old, even his own age. "I made thing," he declared. He extended the document. She anticipated seeing another scribble about an explosion, but what she saw made her freeze. They were the ones. Or at least an effort. 2 stick figures were present, taller and obviously older. One has spiky hair, another, a rounder bob. There was an exaggerated scribble between their hands. At the bottom, in dark, crooked letters that were obviously labor-intensive. Love Choco forever. Ochako's vision instantly blurred as she gasped and her hand shot to her mouth. As she breathed, Katsuki. He scowled. You gotta take it. I am taking it, she muttered, holding the paper tightly as if it might vanish. I promise. He gave a firm nod. Good. He then made an aggressive gesture toward the drawing. Show big me. Her heart twitched so painfully. Okay, she answered quietly. I will. Feeling content, he turned and collapsed back on the ground as if he hadn't just changed her emotional life's trajectory. With her chest hurting and her grief and joy so intertwined that she couldn't tell one from the other, Ochako gazed at the photograph in her hands. When her world shook the next time, Katsuki was sitting quietly by her side when he abruptly tensed up. She sensed his change instantly. Katsuki, she whispered. He raised his head and gave her a look. He didn't have a childlike expression. Instead, he seemed to be remembering rather than scared or intrigued. He had more acute eyes. He straightened his posture. His expression revealed something old and familiar, and my heart skipped a beat. You okay? She muttered. Her heart started to race with anticipation as he silently examined her face for a considerable amount of time, much too long for a toddler. At last, he said, You're going to be sad. Where had the air gone from her lungs? With an artificial smile, she questioned, What? Why would you think that? His shrug was awkward and a little unsure, but it wasn't a childish one. Feels different, he remarked. Inside, she closed her throat. Oh, she muttered. His tiny fingers gripped her sleeve as he leaned back against her once more, but the weight felt different in some way, less clinging, more deliberate. Ochako looked straight ahead, heart pounding with dreadful comprehension. This was a warning, not merely a moment. She was losing the time she had with this open, tender, unguarded Katsuki. She encircled him with her arms, inhaling his scent and committing the sensation to memory while she could. Unaware, or perhaps fully aware, of what was about to happen, Katsuki relaxed against her. So she waited a little while longer. After that, Katsuki became more needy. Ochako initially convinced herself that she was dreaming. Hands in her sleeves, curled against her side, following her from room to room as if gravity had determined she was the center of the universe. He had always enjoyed being close. However, this was not like the others. He would stand now if she did. He adjusted if she moved. His fingers tightened in her clothing as if he were worried she might slink through it if she even leaned away. One afternoon, she knelt in front of him and said, Hey, softly. What's going on, Katsuki? His face crumpled after he froze and avoided looking at her for a long time. I don't wanna go, he muttered. Her heart broke. Oh, she said, instinctively drawing him in. Hey. Hey. His tiny body shook as he held on to her as if she were the only thing holding him to the outside world, and tears streamed silently and quickly down his cheeks. Don't wanna be big, he cried. Don't wanna forget. With her own eyes burning, Ochako rocked gently as she gave him a tight hug. You're not going anywhere right now, she angrily muttered. You're here, I've got you. In her arms, he sobbed uncontrollably, his weary whimpers giving way to angry little hiccups. He eventually lost all of his tension, and his body went limp from sleep. Even then, exhausted but still clinging to her warmth, he remained wrapped around her. She gently moved him onto the bed, pressing him up against her chest while holding his head in one hand and massaging his back in slow, calming circles with the other until his breathing stabilized. She assumed he was gone, but then, barely conscious and half asleep, he whispered. Choco smells nice, she said, closing her throat. Love you, Choco. Silently, tears ran down her cheeks. I sincerely apologize. Holding him as if she could stop time with a firm grip, she buried her face in his hair. I love you too, she muttered. Always. As if he were attempting to crawl inside her heart and remain there forever, Katsuki sighed softly in his sleep and huddled closer. She encircled him entirely, and for a single, fleeting, ideal instant, she gave herself permission to hope that this would last forever. The next moment occurred while they were in the common area. Kaminari grinned and leaned over the back of the couch as Katsuki sat on the floor with his crayons, coloring frantically. Hey, Squirt, whatcha drawin'? Katsuki didn't even raise her head. Pikachu, he whispered. Kaminari gave a blink. Huh. Katsuki glared as he slowly raised his head. She gasped. The air felt like it snapped tight, full force, sharp-eyed, and furious in that exact, unmistakable way. You, he uttered bluntly. Pikachu. The world came to a halt. He wasn't a toddler for a moment. He wasn't soft, tiny, or half asleep. Bakugo Katsuki was his name. Simply compressed. Kaminari became motionless. Oh. Wow. Okay. Like glass, the tension shattered. With a sigh, Katsuki turned his back and walked directly toward Ochako. Without hesitation, he climbed into her lap and curled up close as if nothing had happened. His warm, bright eyes gazed up at her. Chako. He grinned. She melted. Her heart pounded painfully in her chest as she instinctively wrapped her arms around him. Breathing him in as if it were the last time, she pressed her cheek against his hair. She had sensed it, and now she knew. The edges were returning, and she hoped Katsuki Bakugo would give her that look once more soon. But like the young man he had grown into, he was taller, louder, and sharper. She held on tighter and allowed herself to believe, just for a little while longer, as he curled up in her arms, secure and beaming. The next thing that happened to him was in the hallway between the dorms, just before they went into the kitchen. As they walked, Ochako held Katsuki's hand loosely in hers while he hummed to himself and pulled his blanket behind him like a banner of victory. It was ordinary, serene, almost too serene. At that moment, Midoriya emerged from the corner. "Oh, Uraraka," he exclaimed with a smile. "Hi, Bakugo." Katsuki's face turned red, his hand tore from hers, and he came to a complete stop. The sound echoed through the hallway, "Go away, nerd." She almost stopped breathing, and everyone froze. Katsuki's knuckles turned white as his fists clenched. His posture was aggressive in that distinctive Bakugo manner. Too big, too sharp, too familiar for such a small body, and he stomped his foot hard against the floor, his chest heaving. He growled, "Chako's mine." Time stammered, "Don't look at her," as her heart pounded anguishously against her ribs. For one horrifying moment, she was staring at him rather than a toddler having a fit. Midoriya turned pale. I was just. Her nerves were steeled. "Katsuki," Ochako uttered quietly but firmly. His fire went out as her voice broke through it. Katsuki's face crumpled as if the rage had suddenly burned itself out, his shoulders slumped, and he blinked. He whimpered, "Chako." Suddenly, he was so little. He hurried her, his arms encircling her legs tightly, his face pressing into her as if he needed to vanish inside of her in order to feel better. Immediately, she fell to her knees and drew him into her arms, holding his head to her chest. "It's okay," she whispered, gently rocking him. "You're okay. I've got you." He gripped tightly, shaking and gasping for air. "Didn't mean," he muttered. "Just scared." She kissed his hair and said, I know. Midoriya silently retreated, her eyes sad and wide, realizing that she understood much more than he did, but she wasn't listening. As usual, Katsuki grounded himself by curling up into her lap and placing his thumb on the edge of her sleeve. She didn't breathe, but the hallway did so gradually once more. Every time it occurred, every sharp flash, every echo of the boy he'd been, her chest ached. He was scared of it because it lasted a little longer and faded a little more slowly. Even though she knew she couldn't stop it, she held him closer and promised to always be there for him. They were back in the common room in the following episode. With his back to Ochako's legs, Katsuki sat on the ground and silently tore pieces of paper into tidy, combative piles. He was at ease, quiet, perhaps even too quiet. Mina knelt close by and grinned affectionately at him. "You're so cute when you're concentrating, you know that." Katsuki's head jerked up. "Shut up, alien." Mina froze when the word struck her like a slap. "Excuse me." Katsuki suddenly stood up, clenching his fists and adopting a sharp, combative stance that no toddler should be able to. The familiar rage burned in his eyes. "Stop looking at me like that," he yelled. "You're freaky." Her breath caught in her throat, and the room fell silent once more. That edge. That piercing rage that was too big for a tiny frame but too perfectly suited him. "Katsuki," Ochako murmured. At that moment, he turned to face her, but he stopped when the anger left him as if someone had pulled a plug. His fists unclenched and his shoulders relaxed, but he did not rush to her as he usually did. Rather than being angry or afraid, he tilted his head slightly and studied her face with quiet curiosity. "I simply wonder." "Round face?" he inquired softly. Her heart faltered, and she almost started crying before stopping herself. Then she whispered, "Kei Katsuki." He remained silent for a terrifying heartbeat before the toddler seeped back in like water-filling cracks, causing his body to sway and his eyelids to droop. "Chako," he muttered. With a soft, weary sound, he toddled forward unsteadily and fell into her arms, burrowing into her chest. With a weak but firm grip, his tiny fingers curled into her shirt. With one hand clutching the back of his head, she sank to the ground beside him, keeping him close. "It's okay," she said in a shaky whisper. "I've got you." With his cheek pressed against her collarbone as if it were the only remaining logical position, he sighed, already half asleep. Mina silently wiped her eyes as the room gradually began to breathe again, and nobody spoke. With her heart pounding, she simply sat there and held Katsuki closer. Even though it was the most intense, the moments were colliding rather than simply happening. He was slipping, and she knew it deep down, painfully and inevitably. It was painful for her to lose the child, even though she wanted the adolescent back. There was nothing she could do to stop it, even though she wanted to help him and make things better. Her eyes were burning. So she waited, keeping an eye out in case he needed her at any time. Hiroshima was the next person to experience it. Once more, they were in the common area, with Ochako idly rolling a toy car back and forth while Katsuki sat on the rug, leaning against his legs and half asleep. There was silence in the room. Secure. Hiroshima smiled softly as she knelt a few feet away. "Hey, buddy, what you got there?" Katsuki tensed up and slowly raised his head. "Stupid hair," he uttered bluntly. The words were pointed, forceful, and purposeful. There was silence in the room. Hiroshima gave a blink. Hey, man." Katsuki yelled. "Don't talk to me," and he stumbled to his feet. His shoulders were squared, his fists clenched, and he had an aggressive stance that didn't fit someone so small. "Don't touch me." Hiroshima blurted out. "I wasn't gonna," with her hands up. Katsuki stomped. "Hard. Don't." Her heart pounded against her ribs as his voice reverberated angrily. "Katsuki." It resembled the flipping of a switch. Anger suddenly collapsed inward, twisting his face. His eyes widened in sudden fear as his breath caught sharply. He lost his balance and staggered backward, saying, "No, no, no." Then, "Chako!" A raw, desperate scream ripped from him. He broke completely, sobbing and running for her with his arms flailing. He crashed into her chest, but she quickly shifted and caught him. Without hesitation, she encircled him, holding his head in one arm while he screamed into her shoulder and the other arm tight around his back. She rocked him and said, "I've got you," urgently. "I've got you, Katsuki. You're okay." Like he was drowning, he held on to her. He cried, "Chako, Chako, don't." His cries broke into terrified gasps as his tiny body trembled violently. "I don't want to go," he cried. Her heart ceased beating. Just long enough for the words to register, she froze for 30 seconds. Now he understands what it means. She gave him a stronger hug while whispering, "Oh, Katsuki," in a broken voice. Hey, look at me." With his hands fisting in her shirt as if he were worried that she might vanish in the middle of his breath, he buried his face deeper into her chest. "I don't wanna be big," he exclaimed. "Don't wanna leave you. Don't wanna forget." Her vision was blurred by tears. With all of her strength, she grounded him by pressing her cheek against his hair and rocking him. "You're not alone," she angrily declared. "No matter what happens, you hear me, you are not alone." He sobbed more, holding on as if the end of the world was near. Nobody moved around them. Hiroshima stood motionless, his eyes gleaming, his face etched with guilt. Mina put her hand over her mouth. Aizawa had become motionless as well. She held Katsuki while he sobbed uncontrollably, his heart exploding, because she now knew. She wasn't the only one who felt the slipping. Now, Katsuki was also feeling in, and he was afraid. Like a shield, she encircled him, wishing, aching, for time to stop, just for him, just to rid him of his fear. That afternoon, Mitsuki Bakugo came to pay a visit. No warning was given. Do not barge in. She simply existed. Before she saw Mitsuki, Ochako sensed Katsuki's response, the sharp intake of breath, the abrupt lift in his body. "Mama," he yelled wildly, throwing himself across the room. Before Mitsuki could even brace, a small, enraged bundle crashed into her torso. Laughing spontaneously, she grabbed him with ease and twirled him into her embrace. She pressed heavy kisses into his hair and exclaimed, "There's my brat, still loud, I see." With her arms tightly wrapped around her neck, Katsuki laughed, bright and unrestrained. "Mama, Mama." Ochako stood at the heartwarming scene, her chest aching in that familiar way, and grinned softly. It was normal for a moment, just a moment. Subsequently, Katsuki became rigid in Mitsuki's embrace. With a sharp and incorrect voice, he squirmed violently and became suddenly angry. Oi, hag, let go. Mitsuki froze as the words shattered the room like a gunshot. Her hands lifted as Katsuki fell back onto his feet, and the room fell silent as she instantly let go, more out of shock than obedience. Katsuki was standing there looking at the ground. He clenched his fists. Just once, twice. He stomped after that, hard. No, he growled. One more stomp. No, no, no. His anger collapsed inward, causing his breath to catch. Abrupt, helpless streams of tears poured down his cheeks. I don't wanna, he cried, his voice cracking. I don't wanna. With wide eyes, Mitsuki gazed. Katsuki. He didn't respond. He took off running. As if Ochako's arms were the only place left that made sense, he ran back across the room and into them. His fists knotted into her hoodie as he slammed into her chest and sobbed uncontrollably. Chako, he exclaimed. Make it go away. Make it stop. Immediately catching him, Ochako fell to her knees and encircled him like a shield. She rocked him and said, I've got you, in a desperate whisper. Her heart ached. I've got you. You're okay. It was physically excruciating, akin to an open, bloody wound. Shaking so violently that she could feel it in her bones, Katsuki wept against her. With a look of perplexity on her face, Mitsuki cautiously stepped forward. What's happening to him? Ochako was unable to respond right away, so she hugged him tightly and held the back of his head with one hand while he sobbed uncontrollably into her shoulder. She whispered, I've got you, and gently rocked him. You're okay. I'm right here. Chako, he cried, make it go away, please. Painfully, her heart twisted. She held him while the cries gradually became less intense, turning into hiccups and finally trembling breaths. His fingers were knotted in her hoodie as he held on to her as if he was worried she might disappear in the middle of crying. He eventually lost all of the tension and went limp in her arms, still sniffling softly but exhausted and spent. Ochako remained motionless, breathing with him until she was certain he was asleep. Only then did she look up, tears welling up in her own eyes. A few feet away, Mitsuki stood with her arms crossed, shaking rather than furious. She whispered, what the hell was that? Ochako took a swallow. He's changing back, she murmured. Not all at once. It's bleeding through. Sometimes he sounds older. Sometimes he remembers how it felt to be big. Mitsuki clenched his jaw, and that scares him. Ochako gave a nod. He knows it's happening. He doesn't want to forget. He doesn't want to leave. With a drowsy whimper, Katsuki moved slightly in her arms and buried his face deeper into her chest as she gave him a slightly tighter hug. He runs to me when it happens, she added in a shaky voice. I think I'm the only thing that feels the same to him right now. After giving her son a long look, Mitsuki let out a slow breath. Damn it, she sub-vocalized. As Katsuki slept, exhausted from battling something too great for him to comprehend, Ochako lowered her eyes back to him and ran her thumb through his hair. The end was drawing near, and her chest hurt. Even though Katsuki wasn't prepared, it was still coming. The next moment caught her off guard because there had been nothing for a few days. It was quiet and serene when they were in the common area. In the middle of a stroke, Katsuki stopped coloring. The crayon rolled away, forgotten, and slipped from his grasp. He simply stared off into the distance, not at his drawing, without noticing. She realized right away, and her chest ached with worry. Katsuki, she whispered. He didn't immediately glance at her. Am I bad? Her eyes burned instantly, and her heart clenched so tightly that it nearly knocked the air out of her lungs. In an instant, she was kneeling next to him, cupping his face and guiding his gaze back to hers with gentle yet confident hands. No, she replied without hesitation. You're not bad, not at all. He looked down at his hands and gazed at his palms in silent reverence after blinking slowly and softly. Big me is mean. It wasn't a query, delivered with quiet assurance, it was a fact. Ochako nodded solemnly, swallowing the lump in her throat. Sometimes, she admitted. Katsuki's jaw tightened as he said, yeah, he can be. I don't want to be mean, he said, his voice rising abruptly. He squared his shoulders, clenched his fists, and stamped his foot firmly on the ground as if he were prepared to battle fate itself. No, not to Chako, I won't. Pride, love, and grief all crashed together at once, filling her chest painfully. I know, she said in a whisper. I know you won't. As swiftly as it had appeared, the fire drained from him, to be replaced by something worse. With eyes that were bright and sadness that seemed much too old for someone so little, he turned back to her. "You won't leave me, Chaco?" she asked without hesitation, drawing him into her embrace and encircling him completely as he pressed his face against her chest, his fingers gripping tightly as if he were worried the response would escape him. "Never, Katsuki," she screamed, putting her cheek against his hair. "Never." Her face began to well up with silent tears. With a trembling breath, he released the tension in his body and clung to her, fully believing what she had said. She held him there, simultaneously full and heartbroken. She was aware that the reality was more nuanced than that. He was still a child at the time, though, and he needed her assurance. No matter how much it hurt, she would give him that as long as he needed it. Katsuki became quiet after that. He wasn't reclusive, just cautious. His eyes followed the world with a seriousness that was unfit for someone so small, and he sat close to Ochako wherever they went. He was less active. Didn't yell. Didn't have tantrums. He watched. He never moved away from her. He always moved toward her. He never took more than one step off course. He stood if she did. Like a habit he didn't want to break, he curled into her side when she sat, his tiny arms encircling her waist. He climbed into her arms whenever he could. While eating. In the course of instruction. When the light dimmed and the world seemed too vast, there were quiet moments in the common room. Every time he needed her, she held him. He would occasionally revert, just a little bit, and his baby spark would come alive. He would murmur, half asleep against her chest, "Chaco smell nice." Her breath caught. Alternatively, he would raise his head to gaze at her, his eyes shining and vulnerable. "Chaco pretty." Both sadness and adoration would cause her heart to twist painfully. He once whispered, "Love you, Chaco," late at night when she assumed he was asleep. Since it no longer felt like comfort but rather like saying goodbye, tears silently trickled down her cheeks. She embraced him more tightly, enjoying his warmth, weight, and the gentle puff of his breath against her collarbone. She closed her eyes and kissed his hair. Even though he was still in her arms, she allowed herself to grieve for him. The following day, she witnessed it. It happened gradually, silently, and in the pauses between moments rather than all at once. As if he were overanalyzing something that no one else could see, Katsuki turned inward, his eyes straying from whatever was in front of him. He furrowed his brow more frequently. His clinginess increased as his mouth drew into a painfully familiar line of concentration. When his mother visited him, he would not even answer her. With his fingers tangled in her clothing and his voice low but firm, he followed her everywhere. "Mine. Love Chaco. Don't go." Every word fell like a tiny, cautious appeal. Her heart ached because she realized that he was aware of what was going on. Katsuki knew he was changing back somehow, in ways he couldn't describe, and he was doing everything in his power to resist it. Ochako kept him close in her bed at night, her arms firmly encircling his petite frame. With one leg draped over her waist and one fisted in her shirt like a lifeline, he slept nestled against her chest. She memorized him, staying up later than she should have. His weight, the warmth, the way his breath caught in his dreams. The intense, unwavering love that permeated every action he took, including his gaze, words, and touches. She was aware that it would soon disappear. This Katsuki, the vulnerable, the unprotected Katsuki, would be forgotten. Knowing that she would have to let him go, she lay there in the dark, clinging to him as tightly as she could, loving him with all of her heart. The following day, Katsuki didn't say much, didn't snap, didn't turn around, and didn't blow up. He just stayed. She missed his vitality and his unadulterated joy. She was the only person he spoke to. Refused to be held by anyone else. Wouldn't move unless she had his hand in hers. His arms instinctively tightened around her neck whenever she attempted to put him down, even for a brief moment. He whispered small things to her under his breath all day. "Mine. Stay. Here." The words were heavy, too deliberate, too heavy for a child, but his voice was small. In a way that made her chest hurt, his eyes followed her all the time, sad and piercing and knowing. He appeared to be bidding farewell without being permitted to do so. No one attempted to stop her from carrying him everywhere because she couldn't let go of him. They lay together in her bed that night with the lights turned down. Unusually still, Katsuki was curled up against her. She could feel him shift, his breathing slow but not quite asleep. Carefully, slowly, he raised one little hand and pressed it to her cheek. He had a warm palm. Steady. He looked up at her, his red eyes bright and glassy in the darkness, and she froze, heart racing. Love you, Chaco. Before she could stop them, her breath caught and the tears began to flow. Her voice quivered as she pressed her forehead against his. I love you too, Katsuki. He continued to observe her for a moment. Then, slowly but surely, he added, Big Me does too. At that moment, she realized it wasn't a remote fear, rather, she simply knew. It was this. As if she could etch the moment into her bones, she drew him into her arms and held him tight. He gave her an equally fierce hug in return, his tiny arms squeezing tightly around her neck. She whispered, Oh, Katsuki, sweetheart, while crying. I'm gonna miss you. His eyes were bright red and full of tears, but he was grinning as he drew back just enough to gaze at her. Always love you, Chaco. Her heart exploded, causing blood, violence, and destruction. She tucked him back against her chest after kissing his forehead, hair, and other places she could reach. He immediately settled in, breathing deeply and letting his body relax as if he had finally found peace. In the stillness of the night, Ochako allowed herself to hope one last thing, perhaps love like this didn't vanish. They fell asleep like that, holding each other close. Perhaps it would follow him into his adolescence. When she awoke in the middle of the night, there was no soft weight on her chest and she was immediately panicked. Her eyes flew open and her heart slammed violently. Katsuki, she said in a whisper. It was dark in the room. Quiet. He had left. Grief engulfed her for a moment, but then she realized that she was immobile, with powerful arms encircling her waist. They had entangled their legs. Her hands were spread out flat against a wide, solid chest that was too warm and solid, rising and falling with steady, slow breaths. Her lungs filled with a familiar smell. Heat, smoke, and him. Her breath caught, and she raised her head cautiously and slowly. Blonde hair, angular jaw, familiar wounds. Whole, mature, and genuine, Katsuki Bakugo's face was buried in the bend of her neck as if it were supposed to be there. In his sleep, he moved. Chaco. Her heart simultaneously soared and shattered. Instinctively, his arms clenched, drawing her nearer as if he couldn't let her go, even while unconscious. His chin brushed her hair as he tucked her closer to his chest. As the grief finally overtook the joy, hot, heavy tears immediately streamed down her cheeks. The teenager had returned to her. Baby Katsuki was gone. She sobbed quietly, her shoulders trembling, torn between loving what she had again and lamenting what she had lost. Because she knew deep down that she might never experience this moment again. Never get this close. Never be permitted to contain him without fire, walls, or armor. In order to fit into his chest as if she had always done so, she leaned in and curled closer. Oh, Katsuki, she said softly in a broken voice. He heard her even while he was asleep, and his brow furrowed and his grip tightened. Chaco, he whispered, don't cry, as if it were instinct, as if holding her close had always been his nature. He buried his face deeper into her neck, his breath warm against her skin. She put her cheek against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, strong, steady, alive, and allowed herself to breathe him in one last time while grinning piteously through her tears. Then, for the final time, she let herself sleep with him, cradled in his arms, held securely between what was gone and what was left. What the hell? Her eyes snapped open as she jolted to consciousness. Wide, sharp, and completely bewildered, bright red eyes stared back at her. God, she had missed those eyes, and her heart ached. Hi, Bakugo, she murmured. Now it felt wrong to use his last name. She wasn't ready for the way it scraped against her chest. She firmly ground herself by biting the inside of her cheek to stop the tears from streaming out again. Uraraka, he yelled out. What the fuck? Before she could stop herself, she released a slow breath and lowered her head back against his chest. He gave a start. She sighed as the movement brought to mind the area they were meant to occupy. What are you doing? He sounded more perplexed than irate, which was at least a plus. You've been a toddler for a few weeks, she said softly, maintaining her composure through sheer willpower. Villain quirk. You changed back sometime during the night. His mind clearly stopped. What? She forced herself to stand and withdrew from his embrace. Still too shocked to comprehend that he had been holding her, sleeping with her, he instinctively let her go. He demanded, What the hell do you mean, toddler? Why am I here? She turned away from him and sat up straight now. She knew, not because she was ashamed. He had been dressed in children's clothes that he had borrowed. Sleepwear. Something supple, something tiny, far too tiny for his body right now. Hiroshima brought clothes from your room, she said, making hazy gestures. There by the door. Behind her, silence descended. Her heart pounded loudly, clenched in her chest, and she could almost hear the gears grinding in his head. This could not be explained. There was no way to express to him how he had tucked himself into her arms each night. How he had trusted her through all of his tears, fears, and heartbreaking, "I love you" statements. She couldn't tell him that she loved him in return. The back of her eyes were burning with tears. Before he could finish speaking, she hurried to her feet and grabbed her jacket from the back of her desk chair. She wouldn't be able to do it without breaking. "I need air," she whispered. She ran out of her own bedroom before he could stop her, before he could ask another question. She forced the air through her burning lungs because the roof was cold. She took no more than 3 steps before her knees buckled under her as the door clicked shut behind her. She broke as she fell against the wall. Her hands gripped her jacket as if it were the only thing holding her together as she let out sharp, ugly sobs. She sobbed until her chest ached and breathing became too difficult, pressing her forehead to her knees. She wept for the young child who had put all of his trust in her. The young man downstairs would never remember holding her like that, so she sobbed for him. She sobbed because she was unable to look at Katsuki Bakugo at this moment without crying because she had lost something irrevocably. She whispered, "I loved you," into the deserted night. "God, I loved you." Her words were carried away by the wind. In her room below, Katsuki Bakugo stood up next to her bed and gazed at the dent her body had made in the mattress. Her subtle aroma permeated the blankets and gave him an unexplainable, aching sensation in his chest. He felt as though he might have lost something significant, despite the fact that he was completely bewildered. The following day, Katsuki Bakugo entered the classroom as though nothing had occurred. The same step, the same frown, the same hands stuffed themselves into his pockets as if he was already annoyed by everything. He couldn't pinpoint it, but something didn't feel quite right. "Yo," Kirishima exclaimed, beaming from his chair. "Good to have you back, man." "Seriously," Mina said with a smile. "You were so cute, by the way." Amid his stride, Bakugo stopped. "The hell does that mean?" The room echoed with laughter. With a laugh, Kaminari exclaimed, "You were tiny. Like this tall, angry baby vibes." Bakugo frowned more deeply. "Say that again and I'll kill you." "Calm down, dude," Kirishima said with a laugh. "You don't remember any of it." Bakugo opened his mouth, then closed it again because, really, he didn't. All he experienced were flashes, a sweet sentiment, a sense of grounding, and a firm feeling in his chest when he tried to think about it. He was aware that he felt secure. Gentle recollections. A hand in his hair, a voice calling his name, something gentle against his cheek. His head pounded as well. But he scoffed because he was absolutely not going to tell them that. He muttered, "TCH," and sat down. Whatever. Ochako Uraraka, who was seated 2 rows ahead of him, had his eyes narrowed and already searching the room. She didn't look back. Didn't grin. Did not give a wave. Didn't even look in his direction. She was always bright and cheery in the morning, so that was incorrect. She was too quiet, shoulders hunched a little, her hands were clenched in her lap as if she had to use all of her strength to stay upright. Bakugo watched her the entire time, a persistent nagging feeling. The whispers from Mina did not make her laugh. Refrained from interjecting when Midoriya posed a query. She got up quickly and walked out without turning around when the bell rang. He had never seen her like that, so his chest tensed up. What the devil was happening? Over the course of the day, fragments began to emerge, not memories exactly, but feelings. When Kaminari leaned too close to her, she suddenly became irrationally irritated. His body felt an innate desire to move as she went by, as if it wanted to follow. And once, inexplicably, his throat closed painfully as she walked past him in the hallway without looking him in the eye. His first words were, "Hey," before he could stop himself. She turned slowly and froze. "Yeah," she asked courteously. "Far away." For some reason, that hurt. Roughly, he said, "You, okay?" She blinked, obviously taken aback by the inquiry. "I'm fine," she blurted out. Too fast. Before he could say another word, she left, saying, "Just tired." His fists clenched as he stared after her, his annoyance growing. She didn't appear exhausted. Rather, she appeared to be torn between being awake and dreaming. He felt the answer had something to do with him, and he detested not knowing. Ultimately, it was indisputable that she steered clear of him whenever possible. sat with various individuals, departed the rooms early. Never really smiled, but smiled when someone spoke to them. Something twisted in his chest each time he saw her phony smile at someone. What the fuck? In an attempt to avoid drawing unwanted attention, he bit the inside of his cheek and then released it. After training, he cornered Kirishima because he eventually realized he needed at least some answers. Oi, he uttered. What happened with me and this toddler shit? Kirishima was unsure. You sure you wanna know? He was actually afraid of the pause, but he ignored it and squinted at him. Spit it out. Kirishima gave his neck a scratch. You kinda bonded with Uraraka. A lot. His body stiffened. Define. A lot. You followed her everywhere, Kirishima cautiously remarked. Slept with her. Wouldn't eat unless she asked. Cried if she left the room. His vision wavered and the world tilted. I did what? He croaked. And, Kirishima continued quietly, she took care of you. Like, really took care of you. It was like she had adopted a little version of you. Her world had to revolve around you. He swallowed forcefully, which clarified the pain, warmth, and hers. Oh no. His hand struck the wall for balance rather than out of aggression. He swallowed hard. He couldn't recall, but she did, and it was obvious that she was in pain. He fixed his intense gaze on the ground as though it could provide him with answers. Should I? His voice broke. SHT. He looked back up at his friend, who was watching him with concern, after clearing his throat. That ought to have infuriated him, but it didn't. Should I try to talk to her? Kirishima winced visibly. You're not all that good at talking, man. She's strong, she'll be okay. Give her some space, let her try and get over it. With a single nod, he withdrew to his room, his head thumping. He followed Kirishima's advice and left her alone, but he kept an eye on her. Just thinking that word for her made him furious because she appeared weak. This girl was capable of throwing a baseball into the stratosphere, lifting mountains, and fighting just as hard as anyone else. She was not deserving of the label of frail. Unfortunately, nearly 2 weeks later, I was still thinking about that same word. She continued to fight hard while feigning a smile and making jokes with her friends. Though it was carefully concealed, he could see the truth. Tense shoulders, sporadic red-rimmed eyes, and a sway in her step during a fight. She appeared to be struggling to stay afloat. He was losing his mind. He couldn't figure out why he was so worried about her, but all he could think about was how depressed she was. At what point did she stop being merely a supporting character? When did he commit all of her habits to memory? Since he knew what ought to have been right, he was aware that something was amiss. Her pencil was still in her hand. When she was thinking, she ought to have been spinning it and playing with it in between notes. For dessert, she had chocolate mochi, but she liked strawberry better. She had been in her room whenever she wasn't in class lately, but she was usually in the common area outside of class and only went to her room when necessary. Her eyes were usually lively and bright, and she was always eager to joke around with everyone. However, lately, she had been far too quiet, and her eyes had become dull. What a bitch's son. All right, he decided that he needed to know what the devil had happened to Aizawa in order to ask her. After the class had already left, Aizawa stared at him for a few long seconds before sighing when he finally summoned the courage to ask. Bakugo, okay fine. He sat down at his desk, a chair he never used, after giving his nose a quick pinch. That ignited his nerves in some way. After giving it some thought, Aizawa crossed his arms and motioned for him to sit. Aizawa then gave him a glare. If I tell you, you're not allowed to use this information against her or go off on her in a pride-induced rage. He gritted his teeth and suppressed an automatic sarcastic remark because he had to know what the devil had happened. Instead, he nodded. It was easier to be silent than to speak. Aizawa sighed once more after observing him closely for a few seconds. Then he told him everything. From his clinginess and his incessant need for Uraraka's approval to his refusal to exist without her. He told him about all the things she did for him, like feeding him, comforting him when his quirk flared up, and holding him when he cried. How he had insisted that she use his first name, how she had let him sleep curled up next to her, and how she was the only one permitted to use his name. He was staring at Aizawa at the end of the explanation, his mouth hanging open in shock and likely red in the face. He made an attempt to talk. What? He asked, not recognizing his own voice. Aizawa gave him a glare. I'll hold you to that deal, Bakugo. She's having a hard enough time getting back to normal, don't you dare make it worse. He gritted his teeth and buried his head in his hand as his heart pounded ferociously in his chest, causing his headache to rage once more. His legs were unsteady. I won't. He stumbled into the hall after Aizawa let him go without a fight. He moaned and pressed a hand to the wall. What the devil? His head was pounding, his limbs felt like they were full of lead, and all of a sudden he was lightheaded. He tightened his jaw and shook his head, then strode down the hall with some effort. He went to his room because he felt like his head was breaking in two and couldn't handle any extras at the moment. His door was just around the corner when he ran into something. He nearly fell when he stumbled, but instinct took over and he grabbed it, turning to put his back against the wall. He blinked blurry eyes down at whatever he had run into, his vision swimming in perspiration rising as he tried to concentrate. Ochako Uraraka blinked up at him, obviously as shocked as he was, but she also had a worried expression. Bakugo, are you all right? No, Katsuki, mine. He winced as a voice screamed abruptly, then tried to respond. Chako, you say it. He tried to release his hold on her, but his arms didn't react, so he tightened his hold on her without realizing he still had her. He grimaced as his head fell against his will, now perilously near hers. Fine RN face. That was pitiful. He couldn't bring himself to care that she would be completely aware that he was lying. His head raised once more as something gentle pressed against his cheek. Was she holding his face? As her face appeared, he blinked frantically, his vision becoming even more blurry. She appeared worried. Bakugo, what's going on? Now he was totally preoccupied with the size of her eyes, so it must have been his head trying to blow up. She was worried about him, but she was distracted by the fact that she was pressed against him and didn't appear to mind. What? He leaned on her palm, his breath more ragged than he realized, because his head was heavy. Thankfully, he managed to say, headache. His heart pounded in his chest as she gave him a charming smile. She gave a gentle nod. Okay then, come on. He felt the impulse to pull her back into his arms as she started to pull away from him. Stay, Chako. She was a rescue hero, perhaps she knew what was wrong with him. He winced once more and let her pull him forward. She was there, sliding up beside him and bracing his weight against her, but he stumbled so badly that he was unable to recognize what he was doing. Nearly blindly, he followed her as they passed through a door and she lowered him. He felt her hand brush hair off his perspiring forehead to check for a temperature after he struck a soft surface that he dimly recognized as his bed. He instantly felt chilled as she moved away from him with a slight humming sound. Get some rest, Bakugo, I'll come check on you later. No, say it, Chako, Katsuki. He let out a loud moan. His arm reached out blindly as he felt a wave of fear as she started to leave. Chako. He nearly believed she had left after a brief pause, but then her fingers closed around his. His breath caught as she raised his hand and kissed his knuckles, pressing her lips against them. Then her voice cut through the growing haze in his head. I'll stay till you fall asleep, Katsuki. His heart swelled when she called his name. Promise. Her laugh sounded moist. Yes, I promise. At last, he dozed off. He dreamed that rest did not come easily, but rather like a punch. He was little. Not small in a metaphorical sense. The lights were too bright, the voices too loud, the world too big. He clung frantically to warmth as his chest ached from panic for which he had no words. To her. Shish, Katsuki, Ochako's steady, gentle voice whispered. It's all right, I'm here. His own voice rang in his ears, high, broken, terrified. Chako, I don't wanna go. She rocked him gently as she held him closer. She grinned sadly but steadfastly. I know, she said in a whisper. I know. He saw his hands, tiny fists quivering as he gazed at them, and the dream changed. Quietly, am I bad? He asked. Her response was fierce in its certainty and came right away. No, never. He felt an overwhelming wave of relief that left him gasping for air. He collapsed, clinging to her arms. No, I don't wanna hurt you, Chako. He exclaimed. I won't. I know, she repeated. Never lose your cool, there at all times. The room grew too large and empty, and darkness surged. She ran when he screamed. It slammed the door open. Ochako hurried in, her hair disheveled and her eyes wide with terror. She immediately picked him up and held him against her chest as if he were supposed to be there. I've got you, she inhaled deeply. His face was buried in her neck. Love you, Chako. She answered even though her voice cracked. I love you too, Katsuki. He was able to fully relax and feel secure enough to say what was most important. A drowsy, "Big me loves you too," he whispered. "Still me. Love you always, Chaco." She whispered, "I'll stay with you, okay." He searched her face as if looking for lies as he looked up at her. "Promise." She held him until he fell back asleep. She clung to him as if she would never let go. He gasped sharply as he awoke. His heart was pounding so hard it hurt as he gazed up at his room's ceiling. Unlike dreams, the memories did not fade. They remained, and he recalled everything. Perhaps speaking with Aizawa had brought back the memories. "Oh, hell," he muttered in a raspy voice. The weight of what he had witnessed weighed heavily on his chest as he lay there for a long time. With sickening clarity, the grief he had sensed in her eyes came flooding back. She had been everything to him, not just someone who looked after him. If he didn't miss her, then hell. He vaguely recalled how he nearly ran her over in the hallway before catching her against him. She checked on him and assisted him to his room. God damn it. In a similar manner, he had asked her to stay once more. With a moan, he lowered his head into his hands. Even when he didn't mean to, he was such a jerk. Despite her own emotional turmoil from trying to move on from the little boy she had looked after, she had once again come to his aid. Steeling his shoulders with resolve, he swung his legs over the side of the bed. Even though his foolish headache had disappeared, he suspected it was related to the memories. He just needed to locate her. He had no idea what he would say to her. Since it was dark outside and he assumed she might be asleep, he tried her room first. When he knocked, her door slowly opened as if she had forgotten to shut it. He called out, "Uraraka." No response. Her room was deserted. He paused on the threshold as he turned to go. Something in his chest twisted painfully as he carefully flattened a piece of paper on her desk. "What is that?" He moved in closer, and when he saw it, a drawing, his heart almost stopped. Thick, uneven lines, crude, and childlike. A messy scribble connected the hands of two figures, one round-faced, the other with spiky hair, standing close to each other. At the bottom, in irregular, shaky letters, "Always love you, Chaco." It was difficult to breathe in the cramped space. Slowly, his fingers hovered before he touched the edge of the paper, as if he might lose it if he gripped it too tightly. His chest tightened, deep and sharp. "Damn it," he muttered. He finally realized what was happening to her if those dreams were his recollections. She was mourning his loss as if he had passed away, even though she had loved and cared for the young boy. She allowed him into her heart and became a mother to a child who wasn't her own, and now her heart was shattering without him. His heart ached at the idea of her battling alone, so he clenched his fists and growled. He stopped abruptly. "What? I adore you, Chaco. Big me also does." He let out a dry, humorless laugh and covered his eyes with his hand. A big, foolish smile appeared on his face. "No, I adore her. Love Chaco always." He gave a snort. He didn't know, but the childhood version did. What in the world was that kind of crazy shit? He glanced around her room in a daze, and he could practically see it approaching her while she was asleep and pleading to climb up with her. "Bad dream?" she asked him with a smile. As his heart raced, he reached up and grasped the cloth over it, clinging to the sensation of comfort for a brief moment. Her bed now appeared too small and empty. "I'd rather not go. Don't want to forget." A smile appeared on his face. "Okay, all right." He realized now that she had loved him as a child, and now all of his well-built barriers were gone. He had reciprocated her love, and right now, she was in pain. The smile vanished from his face. He turned and ran out of her room after realizing that he could not possibly let her suffer in her sorrow without him. The door slammed behind him, and he could only imagine that she would be on the roof. He took the stairs two at a time, breathing heavily and gasping for air as his heart pounded so painfully. Past events swirled beneath the surface, piercing and unrelenting, colliding until he was barely able to think. Her Katsuki, the miniature version of him, was tender, honest, and unafraid in his love. Back then, he had been everything to her. Was she still in love with me? Was the child the only thing she loved? The question struck deep, and he instantly recalled her assisting him to his room, though he wasn't positive. He had no idea, but he fervently hoped so. She was wrapped in a blanket and had her feet curled under her when he leapt onto the roof. He didn't care that the cold air slammed him right away. She was too preoccupied with whatever she was thinking to turn when he got there. As if the blanket were the only thing holding her together, she was curled up close. She had something clutched to her chest, her shoulders were trembling, and tears were streaming down her cheeks. To see what it was, he slowed down and took a step closer. It was a child's hoodie, and his heart clenched so tightly that he was unable to breathe. My own. His earlier incident had undoubtedly contributed to her continued tears over the boy. She was grieving the loss of a child she loved deeply but never had. A kid who had fully trusted her. Who had unrestrained love for her. Who had never desired to part from her. Damn it, Katsuki muttered. He crossed the remaining distance and put his arms around her before he could second-guess himself, before pride, fear, or instinct could get in the way. Firm. Safeguarding. Uncompromising. Her breath caught sharply as she was startled. Bakugo, she said in a tiny voice. Weak. His jaw clenched. Get rid of that word. His arms tightened just enough to give her a sense of his solidity as he gently rested his chin on top of her head. How he was here. I remember, he muttered. That was all it took, and she broke in his arms right away. With the small one still tightly gripped in the other, she turned and grabbed onto his hoodie with one hand while sobbing, wrenching, violent cries that ripped right out of her chest. She pressed into him as if she had nowhere else to fall, and her entire body trembled. With one hand cradling the back of her head, he held her firmly. The other held her firmly against his chest, sensing each broken breath and trembling cry. I've got you, he said in a rough but confident voice. You're not doing this alone. Not anymore. He continued to hold on even though she was crying more and almost screaming. He simply buried his face in her neck and closed his eyes as she repeatedly pounded on his chest. She had to get this out because it was killing her. Sharp and vicious, like something clawing its way out of her, the sound ripped right through his chest. He was reminded of how much she had been carrying by herself as her hands fisted in his hoodie with desperate strength, the tiny fabric still clutched in her other hand. Due to me. This was for the deceased version of him. He instinctively tightened his arms, holding her close to him as if he were worried that if he didn't keep her together, she would break. Hot and unrelenting, her sobs seeped into his chest, and each one felt justified. Disarming and distracting, the memories continued to flash through his mind. Little hands holding cloth, Choco was said by voice as if it were sacred. Her scent was gentle, cozy, and secure. The way she had become the center of his entire world. Pressing his nose against her, he took a deep breath and swallowed hard. Yes, that was him, and he had abandoned her for weeks to handle this alone. The insight struck like a blow to the abdomen. He muttered, I didn't know, more to himself than to her. I swear I didn't know. She didn't pull away, but her sobs did catch. She leaned in closer, pressing her forehead against his collarbone. His eyes burned and his chest burned. How could he harm her in this way? It felt like he was solely to blame, even though he was unaware of it. I'm not going anywhere, Choco. That kid was me, not someone else. He's gone but I'm here. She stammered as he continued to speak without understanding why. I didn't leave, he stated abruptly and firmly. That wasn't someone else. His red eyes burned as he gazed down at her tear-streaked face, pulling back just enough to put his forehead against hers. Fiercely, that was me, he said. Every bit of it. Her gaze was nearly lost as she searched. I'm still me, he added, his hands firmly gripping her back as if he wanted her to comprehend. I don't remember everything the same way you do, but I remember you. I remember how you made me feel. After some hesitation, he acknowledged the object grabbing at his chest. And I miss you. Her eyes brightened and widened. With a trembling breath, Katsuki drew her back into him while holding the back of her head in one hand and putting her close to his heart so she could feel its pounding. Silently, you didn't imagine any of it, he said. He put his cheek against her hair and said, you didn't make it up. And you didn't lose him. You didn't lose me. Changed Ochako's point of view. He gave her a meaningful hug. Not hesitant, not uncomfortable, as if he didn't know if he was permitted. Nothing else since the night everything changed had been able to firmly ground her to the present like Katsuki's arms did. Strong and alive, his heartbeat thudded steadily beneath her cheek, and the familiarity of it caused her chest to ache in a completely different way. Something inside her relaxed when he said, that was me. She had been terrified, fearful of betraying the person in front of them by loving the miniature version of him. He wasn't moving away from her, but she was afraid that if she allowed herself to feel relief, she would lose him again. She had avoided the child and clung to him because she felt so ashamed. She had almost died when she discovered him injured in the hallway and he had pleaded with her to stay. She had cried because he was her child, Katsuki, proving that he was a part of the adolescent. She kept her promise to kiss his knuckles until his eyes fluttered shut. She had run away as soon as he was asleep, crying all the way to her room. She hurried over to her desk, took out his hoodie, and held it tight. I was aware of his presence. She returned to the roof and sobbed for both of them because she was torn between saying goodbye to the child and deeply loving the teenager. She sobbed openly for the loss of the adorable little boy who gazed up at her and declared his love for her. She sobbed for the adolescent who didn't know why she was upset in the first place, the rough and tumble but sweet young man she yearned to love above all else. Then he showed up, encircling her and swearing he wouldn't abandon her. The relief that he was here caused her hands to shake as happiness began to seep into her veins. He was deserving of an answer. She said, "Thank you," in a whisper. She continued even though her voice cracked. "For remembering," she added in a barely audible voice. "For not pretending it didn't happen. For not leaving me alone with it." He responded by slightly tightening his grip, as if he knew exactly what she meant. With her heart racing, she slowly raised her head and glanced up at him. Something in her chest fluttered painfully at the intensity, searchingness, and familiarity of his red eyes. "Katsuki," she uttered. It felt like stepping over a thin line that she had been forced to cross again when she said his name in that way, without his last name or distance. As she waited for him to retreat, her breath caught. He didn't. Instead, his face softened slightly, as if the sound of it had a profound effect. "I didn't lose you," she uttered softly, tears still clinging to her lashes. "I thought I did. I thought I'd never get to say goodbye. I was so afraid of letting him go, that would be like pretending he didn't exist." She continued to hold on to the small one as her hand grew tighter in his hoodie. "I loved him," she said in a shaky but confident voice. "He loved me, and losing him, it felt like losing a piece of my heart." She forcefully swallowed. "But hearing you say you remember, that he was you," she said, her shoulders drooping as the burden eventually subsided. "It means everything." For the first time, she allowed herself to be held guilt-free as she leaned back into him once more and rested her cheek against his chest. "Thank you, Katsuki," she said in a low voice. "This is sufficient. I believe I can now let him and both of them go if necessary. I won't coerce Katsuki into doing anything." Ochako remained warm in his arms as the quiet, cool night wind blew past them. She eventually stopped trembling. She wasn't better, but she was able to breathe once more. Her fingers lingered on Katsuki's hoodie for a moment longer than was necessary before letting go. Her arms instinctively folded around the small jacket, which remained pressed against her chest as though it were a delicate, living thing. She took a cautious step back and sniffed, quickly wiping her cheeks with the back of her sleeve. "I'm sorry," she muttered. She spoke in a rough, weary voice from crying. For what seemed like the first time in weeks, she briefly met his gaze. Long enough to be meaningful. She made a hazy gesture between them, pointing to his arms, his presence, and the fact that he had pursued her at all. "And, thank you, for this. I know you're not really a fan of interacting with people like this." Her lips curled into a tiny, melancholy smile. "But I really appreciate it." Slowly, she stood up on wobbly legs, her hair gently pulled by the wind. She stood staring at him for a moment, taking in his current appearance, entire, sharp-edged. "Katsuki, still." She swallowed past the constriction in her throat and hesitated. I think I'll be okay now." She did her best to mean them, but the words felt brittle. "I just need to let him go," she said quietly. She held her smile even though it faltered. Courageous, excruciating. Before her determination could crumble, she turned away and walked toward the door leading back inside, holding tight to the small jacket. She continued walking even though each step felt heavier than the one before it. In the past, loving him meant clinging to him. Now, if he wanted to let go, it meant letting him go. Make the switch to Katsuki Pav. She took a step back. It seemed like a fucking chasm, but it was only one step. Something inside Katsuki snapped so cleanly it almost felt peaceful as he watched her hands leave his hoodie and the gap between them widen. "No." The word struck hard and decisively. He observed how she clutched the small jacket to her chest as if it were a wound. Heard her express regret for occupying the space. I told myself that this was what strength looked like as I watched her straighten her shoulders as if she were preparing for impact. For him, she was moving away from him. No way in hell, the thought burned in his chest. He was unable to let her go as she made her way to the door. Her name sounded rough and urgent, Ochako. She stopped. He followed her by 2 steps and reached out to grab her wrist. It was never hard, but it was firm enough to make her stop. She faced him once more. No, he replied, startled. She turned to face him. Weary. It still hurt to be so damned gentle. She said, I'm not. First. I'm not letting you do that, he interrupted in a firm tone. You don't get to decide, you're alone. Her gaze expanded. Katsuki, you didn't lose him, he angrily declared. And you're not letting him go, like he died. In his mouth, the words tasted like iron. He was me, Katsuki went on, moving in closer until there was hardly any room between them once more. I don't care if I was smaller or quieter or less of an asshole, he was still me. Her breath caught. He clenched his jaw and said, and I'm sure I don't remember everything, but I remember enough. I remember needing you. I remember trusting you. I remember loving you. He saw the trembling of her hands around the small jacket. He said, you think you're doing something noble by stepping back, in a deep, booming voice. But all you're doing is hurting yourself, and trying to protect me from something I never asked protection from. Weakly, she shook her head. You don't understand. I do, he said sharply, then instantly relaxed and forced himself to breathe. I do. You're scared that loving that version of me means you can't love this one. After a brief moment of hesitation, he reached up and gently ran his fingers over the material of the small hoodie she was holding. But I'm still here, he muttered. And I'm not going anywhere. Once more, her eyes filled. I'm not letting you mourn me like I'm dead, Katsuki declared. I'm not letting you carry that alone. And I'm sure as hell not letting you push me away because you think that's what you're supposed to do. He took a deep breath. You didn't just take care of me, he concluded. You mattered to me, you still do. Without even considering it, Katsuki stood firmly in front of her, preventing her escape as the wind whipped across the rooftop, cold and sharp. So no, he repeated, more subdued but uncompromising. You're not letting me go. He gave her a serious glance and felt the weight of the unavoidable truth sink in. I'm choosing you. He wouldn't allow the past to tear them apart when it had brought them this far. Changed to Ochako's point of view. She stopped. The wind whipping across the rooftop was drowned out by the words that resounded in her chest. You were my choice. Before she could change her mind, her free hand raised, and her trembling fingers landed on Katsuki's cheek. Warm, firm, actual. Without hesitation or uncertainty, he immediately leaned into her touch, acting as though he belonged there. At the sight of it, at the hope that blossomed in her chest, her breath caught painfully. Why she said, her voice trembling. You're serious. His fiery red eyes remained unwavering, and then he gave her a sharp, unrepentant smile that made her heart race. He shot back, I said I loved you, didn't I? She took a sharp breath and her heart leapt. I don't say shit I don't mean. I never thought you. The words became entangled in her throat as hope and disbelief collided until she was unable to separate them. She stopped talking, moved forward, stood up on her toes, and planted a kiss on his lips. Nothing happened for half a heartbeat, and she believed she might have erred. Then he made a move. Without hesitation, he pulled her closer as his hands rose, one settling firm and sure at her waist, the other cupping her jaw. The kiss was forceful, grounding, and full of everything neither of them had yet to express aloud. It was neither tender nor cautious. Her fingers curled into his hoodie as if she were afraid he might vanish if she let go, and she melted into it with a soft, broken sound. The realization that his lips were warm and correct nearly took her breath away. He had picked her, and he was here with her. Her breath was erratic, her heart thumping wildly in her chest, and she rested her forehead against him when they finally broke apart. Oh, she muttered, grinning despite the tears she hadn't even felt. Oh, Katsuki, the teenager wanted her as much as she wanted him, and for the first time since she had lost the child Katsuki, her heart felt content. Changed to Katsuko's point of view. He knew he was doomed the moment she touched his face. It struck him more forcefully than any explosion ever had, and her fingers were trembling, barely there, as if she wasn't sure she was permitted. Without thinking, he leaned into her palm, closing his eyes for a brief moment as the warmth rooted him. Yeah, he thought, this is genuine. He opened his eyes and gave her a serious look. She had tear streaks and red-rimmed eyes, but she held on to that hoodie as if it might melt. Damn, she was so gorgeous that he no longer hesitated. Not at all. With harsh but brutally honest words, he shot back, I said I loved you, didn't I? He had never expressed his beliefs more. I don't say shit I don't mean. He watched it land, witnessed the way her breath caught, and witnessed the wild, bright flare of her hope. She started to say something about how she never thought he could love her, but her words trailed off. He was taken aback by that anger and was unprepared for what came next. His whole brain shut down as she planted a kiss on him. Oh. Then he followed his instincts. He put his hands on her right away, one firmly at her waist, the other cupping her jaw and brushing her cheek with his thumb as if he had to confirm that she was real. Without hesitation, he gave her a kiss in return, giving it all he had not been able to express. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a desperate situation. Sure, full of everything he was choosing now and everything he had remembered too late. Feeling her melt into him and her fingers fisting in his hoodie just as they had when she was sobbing into him just moments before, he drew her closer. That same hold, but this time it wasn't grief. Katsuki pressed his forehead against hers as they finally parted ways, breathing heavily and his chest tight but not painfully so. He whispered, I meant it, in case she was still unsure. All of it. He instantly returned her smile, which was bright and genuine despite its shakiness. Change to the general point of view. After that, life eased gradually rather than snapping back into place. Classes started up again, schedules for training filled up once more. As if nothing significant had occurred, people began arguing about homework and patrol rotations and stopped whispering about the villain incident. Things appeared normal from the outside, but something had changed inside the tiny shared space that Katsuki and Ochako now occupied. They didn't discuss every topic, but they also didn't have to. Rather, they discovered how to live close to one another once more, cautiously and slowly, like weighing a healed bone. Over time, Ochako laughed more. Not loudly, not all at once, but in short bursts that even she was taken aback by. Katsuki took notice. He stayed close by when it occurred, acting as though he wasn't listening, but he never said anything about it. The fact that she no longer avoided him felt like a win for them both. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence across from one another and studied together. When Katsuki's notes strayed too near the table's edge, she would slide them back. When Ochako saw him gritting his teeth, she would silently shove a snack at him. Ochako carefully folded the crayon drawing and the small hoodie one evening. Safe, undamaged, and priceless, she put them in a little box beneath her bed. She displayed them as cherished mementos rather than as wounds. With a sorrowful smile, she explained what was inside the box to Katsuki. She said quietly, I didn't throw them away, not because she was sorry, but because it was difficult to discuss. He nodded slowly after glancing at the box's edge and then back at her. Good, was all he said. You shouldn't. That was all he had to say. She instantly embraced him, and he clung to her. Things simply began to happen after that. Change to a Katsuki-centric point of view. Without planning, he would enter a room and look at her first. Just checking, nothing suspicious or shrewd. Verifying her presence. Ensuring her well-being. One moment she was staring at him, the next she wasn't. In any case, his body adapted to the habit as if it had always existed. Without thinking, he found himself reaching for her, a hand behind her when the corridor became congested. When she appeared to be about to lose herself in her thoughts once more, fingers brushed her sleeve. When they sat together late, an arm draped over her shoulders, as if it were merely comfortable. It was instinctive. He had spent the majority of his life refusing to need anyone, so that was the part that scared him a little. Refusing to bend. Refusing to acknowledge that certain individuals were more important than others. He was now concerned about her emotions. It was a steady feeling that settled in his chest and remained there, rather than the frantic, helpless feeling he'd experienced as a child. He kept an eye out for the indications. The way her eyes occasionally missed her smile. When someone said, how cute he had been, she fell silent. When she thought no one was looking, her hands became slightly too tight around her mug. Instead of calling it out, he simply approached her after realizing. He would walk her to class, sit closer, and wait silently until she turned back to face him. Not because he owed her anything, but because he wanted to be the person she relied on in the same way that she had supported him. He developed the ability to hold her emotionally as well as physically every day. How to maintain stability without suffocating. How to be there without making demands. He wasn't yet proficient at it. He hovered too much at times. Sometimes he meant to reassure, but instead he snapped. When things felt too raw, he occasionally had to fight the urge to back off. Even so, He stayed because he had finally realized the difference between weakness and gravity when he looked for her, reached for her hand, and held her close. Changed Ochako's point of view. Before she truly thought it was happening, she saw it. When Katsuki entered a room, he looked for her in a non-aggressive, non-guarded manner, simply making sure. In crowded hallways, his hand would linger at her back, never pushing or pulling, always there in case she needed it. It was real because he didn't call attention to it or make a big deal out of it. In tiny ways, he allowed her to get close. Without acting as though it had happened by accident, I sat next to her. Walked at her own pace without hurrying. Stayed when she became silent rather than insisting that she give an explanation. At times, he remained where she could reach for him without saying anything. When he thought she wasn't looking, she would catch him observing her with thoughtful red eyes, as if he were measuring something significant and delicate. He stopped averting his eyes when she looked at him. Her chest ached just from that. He began to open up gradually, with honesty slipped into everyday situations rather than lengthy confessions or dramatic apologies. With tense shoulders, he muttered once, "Crowds still bug me, not a fan of loud situations." "I hate it when people cry," he said more subtly the next time. "I never know what to do." She simply listened while he continued to speak. She never chuckled or demanded more. She discovered where she should stand next to him. Know when to put a hand on his arm and when to keep quiet. When to let him brood without taking it personally and when to gently tease him out of his own thoughts. It still felt miraculous that he allowed her to be in his personal space. He showed her how carefully he cared about her emotions, how he could tell when she was worn out or overburdened, and how his voice softened, just for her, when he inquired about her well-being. Nobody had ever taken such good care of her. She had never been so regularly selected by anyone. Occasionally, in the middle of the night, she would see him across the room, tall, jagged-edged, unmistakably Katsuki Bakugo, and feel a calm, comforting confidence settle in her chest. She cherished him. She loved the fierce, intelligent young man in front of her, but she also loved the small, kind boy she had held through nightmares. I admired how he was developing his gentleness without losing his identity. The way he allowed her to stand close because he trusted her. The way he made an effort to support her. She reached for his hand with a gentle smile on her face, and he accepted it without hesitation. That was all. Changed Ochako's point of view. Just when she thought everything was finally falling into place, a dream caught her off guard. The first thing she noticed was that it was soft and warm. It felt as though the air itself was supporting her. It was bright, warm, and secure. She stood in a familiar place that seemed soft around the edges, as if the rendering of the world had not yet been completed. Then she gasped when she saw him. With his legs crossed and his posture proud in a way that only he could, little Katsuki sat on the floor in front of her. He looked up at her, chest puffed out, his big red eyes sparkling, his hair sticking up in all directions. "See," he exclaimed with triumph. Ochako's heart lifted at the sight of him, and she automatically grinned. Instinctively, she looked around for crayons or a piece of paper. "See what, Katsuki?" His smile widened, so much so that it was nearly painful to look at. "I told you," he exclaimed with excitement. "Big me loved you too." After the words were softly spoken, reality returned to normal. When she recalled that teenage Katsuki had returned, her smile faltered. Katsuki in this form hadn't. The truth settled gently but firmly in her chest, causing tears to well up in her eyes before she could stop them from spilling over. She made no hesitation. In 2 swift steps, she moved across the gap between them and gathered his tiny body into her arms. With a joyful squeal, he embraced her right away, his tiny arms encircling her neck tightly like muscle memory. As if it were the world's most natural thing. Her heart faltered. Grinning through tears, she pressed her cheek against his silky hair and gave him a tight hug. "You sure did, Katsuki," she muttered. For a long time, they remained that way, minutes that seemed both endless and insufficient at the same time. She breathed him in and rocked him gently, repeating everything she had learned. He wiggled after that. "Gotta go, Chaco." She was overcome with panic so quickly that she was unable to breathe. "No," she screamed, gripping harder. "No, Katsuki, please don't, please." Gently, he leaned back and cupped her cheeks with his tiny hands. His touch was certain, steady, and gentle. After that, he bent over and gave her nose a sloppy kiss. Her throat shut as she said, "Love you, Chaco." He gave her a gentle, proud, and distinctly himself smile. "Bye-bye, "Chaco," he said with a smile. "Always love you." Then, she awoke. With her breath catching and tears silently streaming down her cheeks, Ochako gazed at her room's ceiling. She clutched her shirt, pressing it tightly over her heart as if she could prevent it from shattering. She whispered, "Goodbye, sweetheart," into the silent darkness. "I'll always miss you." The pain persisted, but beneath it, soft and cozy, she thought of him once more. The certainty and unwavering faith he had in her, that proud little smile. "Look," she smiled despite the fact that it simultaneously made her heart swell and crack. After a while, the room seemed too small, too silent. Without the comforting weight that used to press against her chest and make the world seem bearable, it was too chilly. She pulled out the little box under her bed and slowly pushed herself up, her bare feet whispering against the floor. As if she were opening a sacred object, she bent down and carefully lifted the lid. Evidence that he was real. The small hoodie, which was soft and worn in the areas she remembered the most, was encircled by her fingers. She briefly held it in both hands before squeezing it as tightly as she could against her chest while closing her eyes to visualize the weight of him once more. He used to curl up against her as if that area had been created especially for him. She was still crying, but she was also unable to stop grinning. He had bid her farewell. He had declared his love for her. He had been certain, so confident, that he had been correct all along. Then she kissed the fabric tenderly. She then reached back into the box and caressed the crayon drawing with her fingers, focusing on the crooked letters at the bottom. "Thank you, Katsuki," she said in a low voice. "For being so devoted to her. For having faith in her. For bidding farewell. For everything." Carefully folding the hoodie, she put it back inside and replaced the lid. She then got up and padded out of her room. At this hour, the lights were low, the dorm halls were silent, and everything was enveloped in a profound, drowsy silence that made even her footsteps seem loud. Now guided by something more stable than grief, she passed through it without thinking. She paused just a moment before stopping in front of another door. Then a gentle but purposeful knock. A muffled curse was heard after an internal thump. Immediately, a smile curved her lips. The door opened. With sweatpants hanging low on his hips and one hand idly scratching at his bare chest, Katsuki Bakugo stood there yawning. When he opened his eyes, they were heavy with fatigue, and his hair was a complete mess, wild and tangled from sleep. The contrast struck her once more. Compared to the young boy she had held, he was very different. And for some reason, she also adored this version. His brain was obviously having trouble keeping up as he blinked a few times. "Chaco," he whispered. "You, okay?" She didn't care that she must appear insane, tear-stained, with an overly broad smile. Before doubt could stop her, she rushed forward, pushing him back into his room and flinging her arms around his neck in a full-body, desperate embrace. "Oh, Katsuki." Even half asleep, his reflexes were sharp enough to catch her right away. His arms encircled her waist and held her close as the door slid shut behind her. "Whoa. Hey," he exclaimed, abruptly awake. "Chaco, what's going on?" She held him close as if she needed to remind herself that he was real, grinning into his shoulder and breathing him in. "I'm okay," she whispered. "I just had a dream." His eyebrows knitted in perplexity as he drew back just enough to gaze at her. "A dream." She gave him a nod and told him about the little Katsuki, his words, and the farewell that wasn't as painful as she had thought. After she was done, Katsuki drew her closer, his chin resting lightly on her head, and he huffed a soft laugh. He muttered, "That little shit," but his tone was affectionate. Ochako held on tighter as he laughed breathlessly, almost delirious with relief. As soon as Katsuki knocked on the door, switched to her point of view. When Katsuki awoke, there was a persistent, harsh knocking. With a moan, he turned over too quickly and immediately slid off the bed. "Shit." With a dull thump, he hit the floor and lay there for a moment, clenching his jaw and staring at the ceiling. Fantastic. Still half asleep, he dragged himself up, rubbed his face, and stumbled toward the door, his annoyance simmering beneath the surface. With his hand already on the knob, he muttered, "Who the hell is knockin' in the middle of the night?" A yawn tore its way out of him as he yanked the door open. He was about to sneer at whoever it was when his eyes opened, but he stopped when he saw it was Ochako, who was smiling and crying while wearing shorts and a sleep shirt. Broad. Vibrant. Totally insane. Before she threw herself at him, he barely had time to ask if she was okay before his mind completely stopped. Instinctively, he scrambled backward, catching her and slamming the door behind her. She wrapped herself around him as if she had been falling, and his arms instinctively locked around her, holding her tight. He was asking her what was going on when a sudden panic struck. His mind stumbled and tripped, saying, "I had a dream." "What? A dream?" He listened carefully as she began speaking after nodding against his chest and tightening her grip. Regarding the diminutive form of him, his smile, his arrogant little c, as well as his farewell. As she spoke, something sharp and warm twisted in his chest. First and foremost, there was a strong, instantaneous, and inevitable sense of pride in the child. He thought, damn right. The child was aware of what he was discussing. Then he understood what that dream had given her, and a heavy, grounding relief came. Finalization. She had received a farewell she couldn't have given herself. He was incredibly thankful that she had experienced that moment, even though he detested what losing the child had done to her. That for her, it had been everything. He almost wished he could give the little bastard credit for it. He was so taken aback by the idea that he let out a laugh before he could contain it. He mumbled, "That little shit." Softly, breathlessly, still holding on to him, she giggled at that, and the sound did something dangerous to his chest. She settled against Katsuki as if it were the most natural thing in the world, and he tightened his grip and drew her right back in. Yeah, he thought, the child was correct. His arms were firm and sure around her waist as he lowered his chin to the top of her head. "You have my undying love." Katsuki didn't want to move too quickly, so it took him a few minutes. But after a while, he adjusted his weight and gave her a light shove. "Come on," he whispered, touching her side once with his thumb. "You're freezing." Something gentle settled in his chest just because she didn't argue. As he walked backward until the backs of his knees struck the mattress, he led her to follow him and then fell, bringing her along in a funny, awkward sprawl. Their combined weight caused the bed to dip sharply. As they landed, breathless and warm, she giggled, and the sound caused his mouth to twitch into an unreserved smile. With one hand, he extended his arm, grabbed the blanket, and pulled it roughly up and over them. She instantly curled up against him, as if she had always known exactly where to go. One arm encircled his torso firmly. With a real and warm palm, the other pressed between them. He instinctively made the necessary adjustments, encircling her waist with both arms and drawing her close to his chest. His shoulders finally dropped as he buried his face in her hair and breathed her in, "Ochako, soap, and night air." "Get some sleep, Chako," he whispered. Careful not to pull away, she moved slightly until her palm landed flat on his chest. There, she began to trace idle patterns, grounding, gentle, and absent. Immediately, his eyes drooped. Yes, that would work. Whispering, "Good night, Katsuki," she said. Then she let out a deep, satisfied little sigh that dug right into his ribs and remained there. When sleep finally pulled him under, his smile grew, heavy-lidded and unguarded. "Good night, Ochako," he replied softly. Slowly, calmingly, her hand continued to move. In a matter of minutes, he was gone. Katsuki had a dream. No flashes, no chaos, no half-forgotten nonsense. It was unlike any dream he had ever experienced. It felt transparent. It was almost too obvious. He stood in a bright, empty place where it seemed as though the world had not yet been constructed. And before him, he said, "What the hell?" Tiny. Very small. His fists were clenched at his sides as if he were prepared to battle God, and he had big red eyes and wild hair that stuck up in impossible directions. And he had a big, uncontrollably proud smile on his face. "You're big me," exclaimed the child with joy. More perplexed than alarmed, Katsuki blinked. "Yeah." The child was obviously excited as he bounced on his toes. "You love Chako." It sounded more like an order than a statement. Before he could stop himself, Katsuki snorted, a smile tugging at his lips. "You bossy little brat." The child was unconcerned. His smile widened even more. He insisted, "You be nice to Chako." No yelling. Katsuki began, "Oi," but stopped himself with a sigh. "Tch, fine." With suddenly serious eyes that didn't belong to someone so small, the child leaned closer. Firmly, "Me love Chako always," he said. "You too, promise." Katsuki acted without hesitation. "Yeah," he replied, "I promise." The child let out a squeal. The moment he was close enough, he launched himself forward at full speed, his body wobbling wildly and his tiny feet tripping. Whoa! As the child collided with him, Katsuki instinctively caught him, his arms snapping around the small body. All devotion and momentum, the weight was light but fierce. His neck was encircled by tiny arms that clung to him as if he would never let go. Still smiling, the child nestled into his neck. "You keep Choco happy," he exclaimed. "Love always." Katsuki felt a warm, constricted sensation in her chest. This time, he held the child close and properly wrapped his arms around him. This was the boy who had openly, fearlessly, and loudly loved Ochako with all of his heart. The boy she had loved with equal ferocity. The fact that he was himself didn't matter. Additionally, he was someone else, someone she valued. "Thanks, kid," Katsuki murmured. The child withdrew slightly before slapping Katsuki's cheek with his hand. It was sturdy enough to startle him without being painful. "What the? Be good, big me," the child commanded. Then, Katsuki opened his eyes. With his chest warm and his heart steady, he gazed at the ceiling while Ochako remained securely nestled against him. "Hey," he whispered. Yes, he was capable of doing that. His grip tightened around her waist as he turned slightly. The promise was fulfilled. Katsuki grinned while gazing into the night. He couldn't even fathom how that dream could have happened. That little jerk is controlling him, giving him instructions, and making demands as if Katsuki had never refused to make any promises in his entire life. Still half disbelieving, he sighed quietly through his nose. Big. Demanding. Fearless. Indeed, that kept track. His eyes fell on Ochako, who curled up against him as if she were supposed to. Her breathing was slow and even relaxed in his arms, her hair a soft mess against his chest. Now that he knew why she loved the child so much, his smile widened. He had been humorous, out loud, obstinate as hell, demanding love as if he had the right to, daring everyone to steal Ochako from him. The child had loved her, damn it, and he knew that too. Not in a quiet manner, not with caution, but the most obvious thing in the world was to openly and fiercely protect her, similar to me. He swallowed the lump in his throat as the realization struck him hard in the chest. That child would have done anything for her. He was in a terrible situation. Now, as a toddler, he was in a competition with himself. Before he could stop himself, a low, incredulous laugh escaped his lips. Unbelievable, he whispered to himself. Now he could imagine it. Holding the miniature version of himself, Ochako grinned so softly that it was painful, expressing her love for him. With a squeal, the child wrapped himself around her neck and shouted back without hesitation. Now that he was familiar with that voice, he could hear it, and now that he had held him, he could see it. The image brought a sudden, intense warmth to his chest that nearly made him gasp for air. He pulled Ochako in closer and buried his face in her hair as he tightened his arms around her. In response, she sighed quietly and contentedly, nuzzling him out of instinct. A strange, dangerous flip occurred in his heart. He muttered, "Love you, Ochako," without giving it any thought. She moved closer, her lips grazing his chest as she hummed softly in her sleep. Katsuki was the key. Oh no, he cherished her. The truth weighed heavily and was indisputable, there was no longer any fear in it. For being the first to say it, damn that kid. For so long, he was too afraid to say it, and damn him. It was all worth it for this. How on earth had he been unaware of that earlier? He never truly dozed off again. Instead, he fell asleep, half-conscious, floating in that fuzzy, soft place where warmth seeped into his veins and everything seemed to revolve around one perfect, basic thing, her. Ochako was nestled against his chest as if she had always been there, breathing steadily and slowly. Without thinking, he held her close, breathing her in while occasionally absently brushing his thumb along her side. "Soap. Go to sleep." Something distinctly Ochako. It was pleasant, too kind to lose by closing his eyes entirely. She finally stirred. His gaze quickly snapped to her face as his eyes flickered open. He observed, strangely enthralled, as she gradually awoke. Her eyebrows knitted together first. Then, as if offended by consciousness, her nose wrinkled. Her lashes fluttered open after that. His warm, bright brown eyes met his, still clouded by sleep. Then she gave him a sweet, vulnerable, and endearing smile. "Hi, Katsuki." A sudden, painful swelling occurred in his chest. He said, "Hi, Choco," his lips quivering before he could stop himself. With a wide, shameless yawn, she stretched her entire body, using him as leverage without shame. His arms instinctively tightened to prevent her from rolling away as he let out a low laugh. Careful, he whispered. You're heavy. Still grinning, she leaned back against him and gave a gentle snort. After a moment of hesitation, he concluded, yes. He desired to inform her. So, he remarked while massaging the nape of his neck. I had a dream too. Her curiosity lit up her eyes instantly, sharpening them. Yeah, he replied to her. About the demands, the promise, the hug that had almost knocked him down, and about seeing the child while standing there. He didn't mince words. She pressed her face against his chest as if she couldn't stop laughing when he was done, and the giggles were genuine and breathless. A quiet, sounds like you got to meet him too, she said. With her arms wrapped around his torso and her face warm against his, she gave him a tight hug. I'm so glad, she continued. With a smile, Katsuki embraced her tightly, placing his chin on top of her head. Yeah, he replied. The little fucker was something else. Her laughter was softer this time. Yeah, she replied. He was. Katsuki closed his eyes to preserve the moment in her, not to go to sleep just yet. Scene from the epilogue about 10 years later. Katsuki's perspective. After unlocking the front door and entering, he popped his neck. He was so exhausted. The patrol had been too long. It was dark when he left, and it was dark now that he was back at home. His boots felt heavy, his shoulders hurt, and all he wanted was food and 5 quiet minutes. He heard tiny feet slapping against hardwood just as he was about to close the door and take his shoes off. Then an excited, high-pitched squeal. Daddy! Before he could even brace, a blur shot at him. He chuckled, catching the child in the act. Whoa! Hey! He exclaimed, smiling in spite of himself. Kiddo, why are you still up? The boy, his boy, was exactly like him. The same crimson eyes, the same untamed hair, his entire face was filled with the same smile. He gave his arms a dramatic pout. We were waiting for you, duh. He gave a snort. Of course you were, my fault. The child joyfully exclaimed, yeah, and then gave him another hug as if everything had been resolved. Daddy, he asked, looking back up in time to spot another tiny figure rubbing drowsy eyes as it tottered toward him. He stooped and used his free arm to pick her up. Hey, princess, he whispered to her. Her soft brown eyes, round cheeks, and untidy hair made her Ochako's reflection. She immediately pressed herself against her brother and cuddled up to him. They were both already half asleep, fatigue finally taking the upper hand. Her little fingers curled into his shirt. She muttered, missed you, Daddy. Her brother's eyes drooped and he tightened his grip slightly. Yeah. His chest was simultaneously heavy and warm as he grinned affectionately down at them. Missed you guys too. He took care not to disturb the bedrooms as he made his way toward them. He whispered, where's Mom? Right here. He instantly looked up. With his arms folded, Ochako leaned against their bedroom door and grinned amusedly at the scene. She was wearing his old skull t-shirt like it belonged to her, which at this point it did, and her hair was a complete mess. Katsuki returned the smile. She snorted softly and said, they wouldn't go to sleep until you got home. He huffed affectionately as he looked down at the 2 children who were now sound asleep against him. Little brats. Rolling her eyes, she moved forward, getting up on her tiptoes to give him a kiss before carefully removing their son from his embrace. In an instant, his cheek pressed against her shoulder as he curled into her. Mama, he whispered. Grinning, Ochako made his way to their room. Their daughter, who was already snoring softly, trailed behind Katsuki. They brushed their hair away from drowsy faces, adjusted blankets, and tucked them into their own beds. When it was finished, they gathered in the doorway and watched for a while. Ochako let out a soft sigh. I love them so much. She was drawn into Katsuki's chest as his arms slid around her waist. She instantly melted into him as he gave her a slow, familiar kiss. He smiled at her mouth. You know, he remarked nonchalantly, we could always have more. She slapped his chest lightly and scoffed. Absolutely not. With a laugh, he tightened his hold and put his chin on her head. He was hungry, and she wanted to hear about his day, so they left the children's room together and made their way to the kitchen. Katsuki had a clear, certain thought as he leaned against the counter and listened to her laugh softly at something he said. Yes, he was relieved that he had been transformed into that young child once because it had somehow, unthinkably, resulted in this. Never in his life had Katsuki Bakugo felt such gratitude. Bonus Ochako POV Epilogue. When Ochako looked at the time, she realized she was losing the battle. It was too late. Once more. A blanket was stretched across all three of them in a pathetic attempt at order as she sat on her bed with one child curled against each side of her. Her son was lying half on the bed and half on her lap, his red eyes drooping but refusing to close. With her thumb perilously close to her mouth, her daughter was nestled beneath her arm, blinking slowly but still alert. "You too," Ochako whispered tenderly as she ran her fingers through her disheveled hair. "It's bedtime." "No," her son replied right away. Her daughter gave a somber nod. "No." With a sigh, Ochako grinned. "You're falling asleep right now." "Can't," said her son. "Daddy not home." She gave a quiet snort. "Daddy will be home soon. You know that." "We wait," he said, moving toward her as if being close to her would be enough to keep him awake. With a tiny sound of agreement, her daughter huddled closer, pressing her cheek against Ochako's lap. It was almost painful to look at them because they were both heavy, warm, and obviously exhausted. Ochako closed her eyes for a moment and tipped her head back. Sometimes it seemed unreal how much she loved them. Their obstinacy. Their devotion. Like the sun rising and setting by their father, they loved him. It was incredibly charming, and incredibly annoying when all she wanted to do was put them to bed and pass out. Still, she grinned. "You know," she muttered, mostly to herself, "you could just go to sleep and surprise him in the morning." Her son said, "Nope," with his eyes already half closed. Her daughter nodded once more and yawned broadly. "Nope." Ochako muttered to herself, "Okay, fine," she lost. After a few minutes, their bodies relaxed and their breathing slowed. On her lap, her son's head lolled. Her daughter let out a quiet, exhausted sigh. Even as she carefully rearranged the blanket and attempted to think of a way to move them without waking either of them, Ochako grinned, her heart full. Then she heard the front door open. "Daddy," her son exclaimed at once, waking up and suddenly gaining energy. With bare feet slapping the hardwood, he leapt off her and ran toward the door. "Hey," chuckled Ochako. Her daughter's tiny face was filled with determination as she sat up more slowly and blinked blearily. Saying, "Daddy," she slipped off the bed to follow, much more slowly but just as devotedly. Grinning, she picked up their son's favorite blanket, which he used to drag around before bed. A flashback of a small, terrified Katsuki at her dorm door, clutching his blanket tightly, came to her attention. She laughed as she recalled the small hoodie she had stored for years in a box. It had been quite the journey to see her son, Katsuki's double, in his hoodie. Both of her children had worn it until they outgrew it. He had not taken it well when she called him Katsuki by mistake and giggled for hours. Not Daddy, she had merely taken him in her arms and given him a kiss on each cheek. "I know you're not, sweetie," he said with a laugh, forgetting his problems, and cuddling up to her. "Mama," Katsuki had laughed heartily. Shaking her head, she went to meet her husband. As he spoke to them, she leaned against the door and held them in his arms until they fell asleep fast. "Where's Mom?" Her voice instantly caused his head to jerk up, and he examined her as though he had never seen her before. She giggled to herself, and he smiled. She snorted softly and said, "They wouldn't go to sleep until you got home." She smiled as he looked down at them, amused, exhausted, and incredibly loving. His tone was devoid of passion as he said, "Little brats." Rolling her eyes, she moved forward to help, leaning in to kiss him briefly before snatching their son. His tiny fingers clenched in her shirt as he instantly clung to her. "Mama," he whispered to her. Katsuki trailed behind her with their daughter as she carried him to the children's room. They set them down, tucked them in, and took a moment to keep an eye on them. Her heart was full when she said, "I love them so much." When she thought Katsuki was just being kind, he smiled as he reached out to her and pulled her into a kiss. "You know," he remarked nonchalantly, "we could always have more." "You're small." She slapped his chest lightly and scoffed. "Absolutely not." She took hold of his hand and dragged him to the kitchen because she knew he was hungry and because she wanted to find out what foolish villain had stolen his precious time with his children. She grinned as his hand felt warm in hers. Who would have imagined that this incredible life would have resulted from a mere day at an amusement park and a random, dim-witted villain?
So this was it for the series. I hope you enjoyed it. To watch more series like this, subscribe to my channel. Till then, bye bye.